Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to call this meeting to order and acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Innu, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. My name is Carrie Linklater. I'm your chairperson today, and I am joined via Zoom by Mr. Neil Harden and Mr. Jeff Peich. Our city assessor this afternoon is Mr. Jeremy Cole, and our administrative secretary is Ms. Melanie Boho. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. Statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparison of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the board. The board is appointed annually by City Council and is independent of it and the city administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of King's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all of the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. And this information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. We will be hearing items 1 through 8 on our docket today. And would you please affirm the assessor and the applicant's testimony?
Mr. Assessor, please state your full name.
Jeremy Rifle.
And you affirm the evidence you about to present is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Applicant, please state your full name.
Marcelo Navarro.
And you affirm the evidence you about to present is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Cole and Mr. Navarro. And fellow panel members, our first property we are going to look at is 77 Main Street. And I understand there is a preliminary issue with this.
Yes.
If you'd like to address that.
Sure. For file number 22-1871, roll number is 12-09244-5000. Roll number 77 Main Street. We're the assessor requested for it to be placed on the applicant for non-compliance for section 53(3)B, the Municipal Assessment Act, and if there's a reduction in the assessment that it follows section 54(3.2 of the Municipal Assessment Act. Essentially, we sent out a mailer. They did not respond to it. There's no response. So I can get into the facts of it if you'd like.
Yes, if you would, please.
So, okay, starting on my page 12. Mailer that was sent out, or I should say, there's the tracking kind of the post that was sent with it. You can see it wasn't responded to. We followed through and changed 12 or 13, or 12 to 13 to 14, and then on 15, 16, 17. Are just the simple questionnaires that we gave, and it was not responded to. So based on that, they're not compliant. If there was a reduction that it followed that 54(3.2).
Thank you. Did you have any questions?
I don't.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Harden, did you have any questions regarding the non-compliance?
Okay. I'm looking at the I'm sorry, I'm hearing an echo of myself here. Looking at the return mailer was blank except for the COVID-19 supplemental questionnaire is,
No, that's separate. The COVID mailer wasn't part of the income expense questionnaire that was sent out and was responded to. That's a separate questionnaire.
so it was mailed out separately then.
Yeah, that's why I said to the pages 17. So from pages 17, 16, and 15, you can see the mailing dates, and it was no response. And then we followed it up with tracking the secondary try, and it wasn't responded to again. So we have the on page 12, which is kind of the information. So it did go to where it was supposed to go. We did get a response for the COVID questionnaire. We didn't get a response from the express questionnaire.
I see. Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Page, did you have any questions regarding this issue?
I have none.
I can't hear you.
I'm sorry, I have no questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just had one question in regards to this, page 12, is that actually the signature? Or is that the person's name who received it? The little sort of dark box at the bottom?
Yeah, that's where the signature would go. But I mean, if they take the printing of it,
So somebody has printed that
Yeah.
name in there.
Yeah.
Okay, I see. All
like
right,
I'm not part of the exchange when that happens. So I mean,
right. That's fine. I was just wondering exactly what that was. Thank you. And Mr. Navarro. I think you have something.
Yes, we've discussed this already, and we've discussed it with the owner. So we are not going to contest this penalty request.
Okay, thank you. Did you have any questions in regard to that? No. Mr. Harding, did you have any questions in regard to that?
Nope, it seems straightforward.
You're accepting the non-compliance? Yes, Mr. Peich?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you, and I have none. Mr. Navarro, the floor is yours if you'd like to proceed.
So we are looking at 77 Main Street, and this is a property owned by the Northwest Company. And you can see on page 2 that we are requesting a reduction to 12,024,000, class code 60. I will jump to page 6 of the report, and you can see the picture, the overhead picture there. So this is the property, I guess a bird's eye view, you could call it. And it includes the building with the red teardrop and the parking lot. And then on page 7, you can see another picture of it there. I'm sure most of you have seen this building at one time or another. It is, if you're going north on Main Street over the bridge, it is pretty much the first property on the right side after the bridge. So again, we'll jump to section.
so we're getting an echo here pretty good.
Go ahead. Okay, so we are looking at pages 12 and 13, and obviously we are using the income approach to value. We have looked at several properties to determine our rent. And we've gone with a blended rent of $12.25 for 97,140 square feet. That is market rent of $1,190,448. In terms of the type of building, this is a building that has been upgraded over the years. However, we are applying an $8.10 rent to the 18,000 square foot basement. And as you can see on page, you can't see it clearly on page 7. That is the overhead picture. I should have probably provided a street view picture. But the basement doesn't have any windows. It is used as office area / storage area, and I believe there are some mechanicals in there too. In terms of the rest of the parameters, they're fairly straightforward. We are asking for a vacancy of $10 per square foot, sorry, a vacancy of 12%. Shortfall of $10 per square foot, $7 or 7% for non-recovered expenses, and a capitalization rate of 8%. And again, we have adjusted the cap rate from 7.75%. Again, this is a large single tenancy building, so we do typically add an adjustment for those types of scenarios where there is a large occupancy from one single tenant. And you can see the income summary on page 16. So we are asking again for 1,190,448 as the market income, 12% vacancy allowance, shortfall of 10, 7% for non-recoverables, 8% capitalization rate. That gives us an income value of 10,721,183. Now, in terms of surface parking, we don't have any argument with surface parking that the assessor has estimated in their model for net operating income. We do disagree with the capitalization rate. And this has been a consistent argument throughout this cycle that we're not accepting a 4.5% capitalization rate on parking. Knowing that most parking vendors, most parking operations in Winnipeg have experienced up to 50% reductions on their rental income, their gross rents. So that is, in our opinion, a risk that has come about from the pandemic. On page 18, you can see the total summary. And again, we are asking for a value of 12,024,000. And I am open for questions.
Just briefly, we're in agreement that the building has had numerous renovations over the years, the last major one being in 2011. Correct. Okay. Yeah. So it's an updated building. I'm just looking at your work versus hours. There's a 91-cent difference in overall rent.
Yeah.
Correct. Vacancies. You're using the same vacancy. We have the difference between 3% versus 7% non-recoverable expenses. Correct.
Correct.
And then the other issue is for the building, you're using an 8% cap rate versus a 6.95%.
Yeah.
Has there been any consideration to the upgrades of the building over the time experience that a lower cap rate would be more reflective?
I think, yes, I mean, there have been some considerations to the building. I think in terms of the location, the single tenancy, we are also contemplating whether this property is sold, whether it would remain a single occupant building. Likely not, given the size of it. So that is also a reason for having a higher cap rate.
Okay. Next question would be, other than that, because that's pretty much the differences in our workup. The surface income, you're not in contention with the surface income, just for the parking, I should say. You're just in contention with the capitalization rate, 4.5 versus 5.
Right. So we've done quite a few of these parking estimates throughout the years, and generally we come fairly close to each other on the net operating income side.
And just so we're clear, you stated that the issue that you had there, the difference really between 4.5 and 5.5 is obviously the COVID factor, which happened. But that would be, in my mind's eye, future forecasting and assumption that it would reoccur. Are you simply saying because the income was dropped for a couple of year and a half? So that's the risk for that particular issue.
So I think I'll explain it my way. So parking obviously has a connection to office tenancies in the downtown, and tenancies have been affected throughout. I mean, we walked through a building not that long ago and saw hardly any people there. And that's been my experience walking through a lot of the buildings that I've inspected this cycle. That said, we have had conversations with parking providers to see exactly how this is improving, whether it's improving, whether it's staying static, or whether it's getting worse. The most, what we've heard from the parking providers is that it really hasn't changed. So the parking incomes are still, they're still low compared to pre-pandemic levels. So if it was an event, I would say it wouldn't have had that continued effect. And the connection between the office tenancies and the parking, until we see an improvement in office tenancies, I don't see how we can see an improvement in parking.
So I'll stop you there. Have you noticed any dropping of rates? Rental rates?
No, I don't think rates are dropping, but incomes are still static.
So as far as the block of time that we're looking at up until to make that judgment call on, it's the start of the pandemic up until April 1st, 2021, which would be about a year and a half.
Yeah.
So are you talking that they currently past post reference are low, or
Well,
is that factored in, which would then be future forecasting pulling it back?
right. So again, I don't want to introduce any post-reference date information. So we're talking about strictly up to April 2021. But if realistically, yes, things haven't changed. Many of the parking providers are writing down their assets at this point, and we've been told that. So that's a scenario that really has never happened, where they're actually taking the fair market value of the property and downgrading it. So if you were to look at future projections, at this point, I don't have a crystal ball. No, nobody does. So nobody can tell really how this will work its way out.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm, the information that I can look at, the information you can look at is up until April 1st, 2021. The only thing we can really reflect is seeing it if asking rates were going down, if they were starting to reduce. You haven't seen that yet, because that would be the peak indicator.
Well, yeah, I mean, if your thought process is that they're going to stimulate more,
Yeah, exactly.
more demand by decreasing the price, that's one strategy, but
It would be the pinnacle, if you're looking at all parameters,
Yeah.
that would be the trigger factor, which would indicate a risk associated with that.
that's an option. But I think given the static nature of the incomes at this point, I don't know if that would really help.
Okay, that's all the question then.
Thank you. Mr. Harden, any questions? You're muted.
One of these kind of days.
You're still muted.
Mute. Okay. I'm not sure I grasp the significance of the single tenant increase in the cap rate. Could you explain that again?
Well, it's the risk of a single tenancy. So if it goes dark, then you're looking at 90,000 some square feet that you have to repopulate. And the difficulty in that is that you're probably not going to be able to find another tenant that suits that need. What you're likely going to have to do is put a lot more money into it in terms of reconfiguring the space to suit multiple tenancies. So that is the risk.
Okay, would that differ if it was owner occupied as it versus a
No, not from our perspective. It's simply a single tenancy.
okay. Now on the parking, if I understand your argument, you're arguing that as of April 1st, 2021, there's a great deal of uncertainty into the future parking revenues, certainly over the short term, short and medium term, because at that point the pandemic wasn't over, and that that should be reflected in the cap rate.
Yes, that is our argument specifically.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Peich, did you have any questions?
I do, and it really is a point of clarification. It's just following on the parking concept and the capitalization rate for the parking. I may have misunderstood you. My question is, did you not indicate that parking revenue stayed the same or has been fairly flat and continues to be so?
Okay, so it has been static in the sense of static since the pandemic started. Parking revenues prior to the pandemic were pretty much in an upward trajectory. You could count on a year-over-year increase pretty much religiously. At this point, that chain has been broken. So since the pandemic started, those revenues have remained fairly static. And I believe I also mentioned at some point that parking revenues since the pandemic started I'd say probably on average have been reduced by about 50% for most parking providers.
Sorry, was that 15 or 50?
50.
50.
So yes, parking, when I'm saying they've remained static, but it remains static in the sense of the 50% has remained static and it continues on. So I think any prudent investor would probably consider that the pandemic would have some effect on that.
Thank you. I have no other questions.
Harry, can I ask a follow-up question on that?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Is the parking on the open market for this building, or is it to building occupants?
I believe during the day it is building occupants, but I'm not sure if they allow. I believe that there is the availability to park there after hours. I'm not really sure how much demand there is, really, considering that you can probably find parking in the Forks if you're going to the Forks. This is a very specific location, so I don't know how high that demand actually is.
Yeah, it strikes me that the location isn't. If you're going to a baseball game, you won't be parking there.
No.
If you're going to the Forks, there's certainly a lot closer places to park.
Yeah,
that's for sure. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I just have a couple of quick questions.
Yeah.
Just regards on this parking lot issue, has Altus collected any data on this?
So,
or are you planning on writing a report? Because I think you've sort of said you're thinking it's going to be continuing.
I would say that for next cycle, if it hasn't improved, we're going to have to obviously do something in terms of a report on the continuation of, the decline in income on parking in the downtown. And certainly there's also the question of what the highest and best use of the property is at that point. If you are, for example, a standalone parking lot in the downtown and your parking revenues fall so far, is that really the highest and best use at that point? It's something that we're going to have to contemplate as this keeps going on, if it keeps going on.
Right.
At this point, we haven't. In this particular situation, it hasn't been possible because, again, we accepted the penalty because of a specific reason here. But we have been monitoring most parking in the downtown. So again, it's why I can speak to it that things are continuing as they have been for the past 2.5, 3 years now.
All right, thank you. My second question is in regards to, you've been speaking about the building being a single tenancy, but and then thinking it needs a change in the cap rate. But how long has this tenant been there for?
Okay, so this is an ownership question. They are the owner. They're not technically a tenant. And again, we typically do apply some type of premium in these situations, whether it's owner occupied or single tenancy. Because we don't know the nature of the Northwest Company. I mean, yes, they have been around for a long time, but it doesn't take much to bring down a company. We've seen a few fall during this period. However, looking at the property itself, if we think of it simply as a large single occupancy building, if that fails, then you're going to have to invest a lot of money into this property to change that, because you're not going to find somebody who in Winnipeg who is willing to rent, upwards of 90,000 square feet.
Did you have a chance to inspect the property?
I did not have a chance to inspect it, but I did have a chance to actually speak with the property manager.
Okay. Can you
so,
speak to the
yes,
condition of the
so-
building? Because it's 1911.
No, it's not 1911.
I don't think there's any
No.
issue between there.
No,
Okay.
I would say that if you blended the current, repair renovations that you see there now into the original age of the building,
Mhm.
you'd probably land somewhere in the 1970s. But where it says effective date 1985 to 2011, that's just as plausible. I mean,
Right.
It's really a more updated modern building. It's not a 1911 building.
Well, it's 1911 to 2011, so.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
So-
we
sorry.
didn't bring up the issue, for example, of this being a heritage property or anything like that. It's not. If it was a heritage property, they wouldn't have allowed these changes to actually occur.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, I thank you. That's all my questions.
Yeah.
Mr. Paul, if you'd like to proceed.
Okay, so for the 2023 assessment, we're asking for it to be confirmed at 15,484,000. And we kind of go over the condition of the building, which I don't think there's any disagreement here today. It was originally built in 1911. We have a renovation, a major renovation occurred in 2011. We have an effective age of 1985. We have 97,141 square feet leasable area and 59 outdoor stalls. So if you look on page 2, the building envelope was worked on. As you can see, they have a cantilever out the windows area. It was a nice renovation. I don't think there's any issue that the property owner is in good stewards of the building. So the condition of the building, I think is average to better than average, but they're merely maintaining their property properly, right? So there's no issue on my end where it's a average to low average building. They're doing their property diligence on their property. So on page 2, at the bottom, speaking to the demand for parking, as you see, folks have highlighted in pink. Their roadway there, if you walk along there, it's all lit up. It's got sidewalks. I go before it's quite often over the years. It is very hard to find parking. Sometimes you're driving around trying to find parking. This is a very good alternative for others than parking at the site. You can actually see the building itself at the bottom right hand side in gray. So it's a shorter walk from here, this parking lot, than it is from some of the parking lots for the actual works itself. So having said that, this isn't after hours shed parking on the weekend, demand on events on after 6 p.m. parking. I don't believe it's that strong here. But there is residual here that you'd be able to make some kind of money on it because of this close proximity to the forks. Other than that, I don't think there's much of a draw. There's just the location where it is. So our next pages on page 4 and 5 is the market from 2018 to 2020 for the Class C building, which this is. We have for 59 comparables for a total of approximately 350,000 square feet. We have an average rental rate of $12.62, a weighted average of $30.08, and median of 12 as well. And then the maximum are what they are there is 7 and 19. There's a bit of variance here. So when you look at this property, on the next page, I'll go over it on page 6, the income stream.
We have an overall blended rate of $13.17. It fits quite well within the marketplace for a bit better than average building. You would expect that. You'd expect between the $13 and a $14 rent for the building overall. So when we see it at $13.17, I think that's reasonable. So for the PGI at $1,279,463, I think it's well within market. And then our standard parameters do apply from that point on. 12% for vacancy, expenses at 3% non-recoverable, and then shortfall at 10%, giving you net operating income out for the building, $975,581. We have a capitalization rate model that's 6.95%. So that value then is $14,037,000. I think realistically, the argument whether it's owner occupied, and it is, versus it's one tenant, or if there would be some capital investment made into the property, which wouldn't be reflected in an income stream as such, to make it several tenancies or 4x4 or whatever the case may be. That's more of a hypothetical that I don't think really needs to be explored, that would affect value all that much, because the capital that you would put in, you would get back having more CRUs open up to market. You're no longer reducing to 190 or so thousand square foot CRU, you'd have several in line with that. So, but given the nature of the building, the quality of the building and how it's been managed and maintained, I don't think that's a reasonable possibility that's going to occur anytime. So from that point on, we'll go to the parking on page 7. As we can see, we have median parking net stall rates of $82 at 26 cents, 84 mean and median at 84 and 47. Then we also have additional. So I kind of looked outside of the shed exchange. I kind of looked around the South Broadway where this is located at $96 for the median on page 7. So when we see on the next page, page 8, parking net rent of stall rate, anyways, I should say, at $92 a stall. I think that's fairly reasonable, right with the market. I have no way to test because we don't have a reporting out. The reason why I asked for the income expense questionnaires is to see what the performance of the property is, to see, we're doing market, not contract or leasehold, but we should be testing both and seeing the reasonability of each one. So at $92, I think it's reasonable, and without being able to test on the actual reporting from the property owner, that's as far as we can go with that. So that produces a net operating income of $65,163, capped at 4.5%, which is a model cap rate, gives the $1,447,000. Our synopsis of our summary of the income streams is on page 9, which summates to rounded $15,484,000. So we've already touched on INE in the non-compliance matter. So with that, I have no questions.
Thank you. Mr. Navarro, questions?
Yes. So we note that this property is I believe 90,000 square feet, 97,140 square feet, almost 100,000 square feet. And we are looking to estimate the market value of, or the market rent that this thing would achieve were it in the open market. And you've provided a set of comparables here that quite a few. Do any of them actually reflect the property in terms of the size? And I mean, I'm just speaking specifically about the scope of the property. It is quite a large property, correct?
Yeah, no, it is a big property, given that it's obviously a headquarters type property, and you would need that size for the utility of what they got. It'd be more of a selective range. Obviously, you'd be wanting a bigger company talking about that space. But as far as from an income perspective, if we look at page 4, my comparables number 25 and my comparables number 32, which are 31,745 square feet, which is $15 square foot, and that's at East 25 Sherbrooke. And then there's another one at 777 Portage, which is 39,960 square feet, which is at 1772 square foot. That's as close as we can come to the 90-some-odd thousand, so. How the property sits is how it sits, so, at $13.17, I think we're really pretty reasonable for a property that's been well maintained, had significant renovations over the years, well suited just off the downtown. High frontage, high traffic.
This is a single property where you divide the income streams between the parking and the office building, correct? And you also produce a separate valuation essentially for the parking versus the office building. Now, is this something, do you think that this property could be readily split up?
Like subdivided,
Subdivided?
like 2 separate rules, 2 separate titles, 2 separate owners, like for parking and then versus building?
Yeah.
Could be an option. Not what I really put in. I don't think there would necessarily be a property owner wanting to do that. I would think I want to maintain control of my property.
So if these properties sold, if this property did sell, and we were looking at the capitalization rate, we would be looking at an overall capitalization rate versus one specifically for parking and one specifically for an office building.
What parties do outside of the assessment process and outside of assessment case law is up to them. They'd also be looking at a discounted cash flow future projection before we bring it back. They wouldn't be looking in the past. It would, but that's not money coming to you. You'd be looking at the money coming to you. So we have to. The caveat on all of this is that we always have to follow case law and the Municipal Assessment Act, which case law governs. So I really can't make that call.
And in terms of the question on risk, if we're looking at the pandemic, you view that as simply an event and not something that has continued on, that an investor would probably factor into a valuation if they were to contemplate buying this property at some point in the near future, or as of April 1, 2021.
As of April 1, I'd look at all the parameters, like as of that date. April 2nd, time doesn't exist. I cannot value, I cannot put a projection on that, and I won't. That's not how we should do this. I'd be looking at the trend. I'd be looking at the market demand and how strong it was. I'd be looking at the year-over-year of increases, and I'd be looking at would there be a shift for this? They call this a driving city for a reason. Would that change? Would people be more into mass transit? Well, then the flip side of that, you would be exposed to a lot more people on the bus. So if those people are really worried about COVID, you would be pulling back from that. You would be wanting to be more in your car versus on a public bus several times a day, several times a week. Overall, I'd be saying that income stream for parking would be the one that would be less subjectively hit versus anything else because of the demand for parking downtown and the limited supply that occurred prior to COVID. So when I'm looking at that from an investment standpoint, yeah, there would be some pause there, but there wouldn't be a large caveat in that, because the way that I would be addressing that would be dropping the rental rates to get back in my lot. And then once they're back in my lot, we slowly continue the upgrade and put back market where we feel it should be. We haven't seen that yet. We haven't seen any dropping of rental rates. And that's the hinge pin that I'd be waiting to see within the marketplace. I don't see that anywhere yet. So
on the issue of the demand question, now if there's no demand there to begin with, what would dropping the rates achieve at that point? Well, I mean, demand has fallen to the point where really I'm not sure that the incentive, and this is commentary, would that incentive of dropping the rates actually attract more people to that lot?
Yeah, that's competitive nature of the marketplace. If you can find a better deal on one lot versus another, you're going to fill your lot up. So overall, we don't see parking owners or parking management, which is only a few handful governing the whole downtown, dropping the rents, trying to get people back in. And then once lots are, if you say they're half empty, 50% you're using, or whatever the case it may be, moving into the future,
we don't see that recovery, then that's when you would start putting, then that's when you would start putting the increases year over year, the way you had before. You're basically managing it for the most stall per square foot that you, or stall rate, that you get. And we haven't seen that drop yet, so I don't see from a management perspective for the owners, that degree of risk, I just don't. So until I see that dropping of rental rates, then you can start seeing a reflection of the expected vacancy, which would be to occur, which is currently occurring, being addressed.
And lastly, getting back to the issue of capitalization rates. Now, the city has estimated in terms of their model, and I'm just gonna, briefly skim over this. But we're looking at, we don't have a C category to begin with, but we're looking at between 5.6 and 6.90 between the 20th and 80th percentile. Now, did the city actually calculate any property sales? Like, was this based on the actual calculation of sales that occurred?
As far as the model parameter, I didn't do any of the model work. I couldn't answer that. I've just done municipal board level work, which I do my own analysis.
Right. Was there much activity during this period?
No, nothing sticks out in my mind. So I had it with.
Okay. And I have just a very tiny rebuttal.
Okay, we'll just finish with that question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm done.
Thank you. Mr. Hartley, any questions to the assessor?
Okay, you don't, in terms of the cap rate, you don't have a downtown C, and you don't have any parking cap rates. Where might we find those?
As far as for C-class buildings and for parking lots, those are strictly model derived. I don't have direct evidence in this report to give you for Class C or parking. If that's what you're asking.
Yeah, how many parking lots sell for the purpose of being parking lots?
Some have strictly. I've reviewed some that have, but there's also the residual that it can be a holding for a lot that it has the potentiality to be developed, meaning the parking income stream is on it to pay for it, and you're going to carry it to you more. At one point, you redevelop it if that may be, but you have to have a size of lot and a location that is developable.
Yeah,
there are some that aren't, and the way that the parking income has gone, parking income is very strong for a long time, where that income stream is pulling away from any potential redevelopment, because realistically, what do you have to improve once you pave it? You just have to patch it. You have to maintain basically service grade parking lot, which is far cheaper, far less risk than putting in a building and everything else that you have to maintain that goes along with the structure. So as the market was increasing over the years, some of those sales, which I have looked at, are being marked down as parking. They're buying it for the parking. They have no intentions of redeveloping it, right? So, and again, if the market falls out for parking, there may be a reflection in the marketplace transactions moving forward. But the only thing that we can really go on after COVID is it's been year over year increasing very steady, and then we're right at COVID, and we're going through COVID, and now we're kind of recovering from COVID, arguably, if even now, arguably we're recovering. We haven't seen a drop in those rental rates going down. And that's where I would put the risk, that's where I would put the reflection on it at that point. Because at that point, you always want to have as much money coming into your property as you can, whether it's a parking lot or a building. So if you're going to address vacancy by reduction in rent, more people come to your lot versus the lots around you. You now have about that income coming in. And once they're there, you can start creeping up the rents again. And that's generally what we see. We haven't seen any drops of rental rates that I've noticed.
Okay, but I don't know how true that is. Would it not be fair to say that owner of a parking lot, if he feels that there's not any demand, no matter what the price is, he's going to keep charging the maximum you can for the people that are there versus trying to lure non-existent parkers to come park there.
I think that would be a highly typical and very difficult strategy for management to pass by me if I'm working downtown and I own downtown property and there's a lot of competitive properties that have parking on it. If I cut my property by say half and everyone else notices, I put up a sign, pay half here or walk across the street or block away and you pay double, my lot's gonna fill. There's no lease agreements that are 2 or 3 years long. You can quit your parking 1 month and be in another lot the next month. It's very competitive. So at that point, you get that money coming back in. And then at that point, once you're full, 10%, $15 a year, whatever it may be to increase, and you would subjectively, and this is why it's so important that I would ask on compliance for rental rates versus the stall counts and the overall revenue of the property, because you can make a judgment on the performance of the property. You can see it if you're 100% occupied, all your stalls are allowed it because you can take your monthly parking rate, you can times that in, it equals your potential revenue. Then your market is maybe you can push that up a little bit still. Or maybe once you start pushing that up a little bit for rental rate, your revenue starts dropping a little bit because you have people leaving. You can make a judgment call on the performance of the property. That's why you ask for those 3 parameters. They're the 3 parameters you need to make that call. So when I'm looking at would I drop my rate to try and gain more money? Absolutely. If I felt that it was at much of a distressed point in time. But as far as if I have a property where at one point it was full and then anything would happen, or in this case COVID, now I feel moving forward there is no potential income on this property lot, that's a hard sell. I just don't see that happening. I think established parking behavior, parking incomes that haven't been established in the past would continue in the future. It would just be how do you address a short-term issue. And that's really what COVID is. So.
Okay, and now in terms of the building itself, it's fair to describe it's on the periphery of downtown.
Yeah.
Not a central location.
Outside the center business district on the other side of Main Street, going down Main Street towards the river, framed in by the forks, and forks of the turning lane to get in. It runs right past it. It's highlighted. So yeah, it's just on the fringe of the downtown, I would say, inclusive of downtown.
Would that affect the cap rate as compared to saying being a more centrally located downtown C building?
There's pluses and minuses. If you're looking for a headquarter type office, which this is what it's being used for, you don't have to fight rush hour traffic into downtown. You're on the periphery of it. You're there, you can do business there. You're a quick access out of downtown. Plus you have your own parking, or as far as your 59 stalls, which for a building this size may need more. Realistically, that's a large footprint for 59 or so stalls. So I would look at it that you really couldn't make a call one way or the other whether it would be beneficial or negative. There's both of that yin and yang, both of that. So
okay, thank you very much. No more questions.
Mr. Pike, did you have any questions?
Sure, we may have flogged this one already, but just a point of clarification. So when I see a number of rent rolls with stall counts varying between 4 and 175, the thing that comes to my mind is, does stall count at all impact on the operating income per stall?
Oh, you mean if your lot itself is larger, more visible, more people would want to park there? Absolutely, that would play into it. Versus if you have like a 15, like there are some very small properties that are more surplus use and they're parking on it, right? Versus a large, yeah, that could be a factor in it, but.
So does the stall count then impact on the expense ratio generally? So more stalls, lower average expense to maintain per stall? Is that
generally? I mean, generally, if you're looking at your snow clearing, if you're looking at your
If it's electrified, I mean, depending on the stall counts and how you're using it. Yeah, and you could look at it for the utility versus the income coming in versus your expense to maintain it would be a little less. But you know, for this case here, we don't really know as it's owner occupied. I don't know if what they're charging or if it is open to market. Are they charging an employee rate? Are they charging open market rate, which they're matching for the competing properties around? I couldn't say.
So in the case of a higher stall rate, in this particular case, 59, is that higher risk or lower risk?
For the subject property itself, I would say no, that's not high risk because you only have 59 into a footprint of 90,000 square feet. You most likely don't have enough demand, or I should not say that wrong. You most likely don't have enough supply to meet the demand of a large building like this. So there is other parking around. So I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if some of the employees are parking elsewhere, and then your core employees or executive employees gonna have first dibs at the property like this.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to flog that a bit more.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Page. I'm probably going to flog it here a little bit, but so this parking lot has a 4.5 cap rate, correct?
Yep.
And it's considered outside the shed, on the edge of the shed?
No, it's not in the shed, not even on the outside of the shed, I would.
Okay. I'm sorry, I thought I heard you say it was considered to be outside of the shed.
No,
So-
it's not in the shed, and I
Right.
wouldn't even say it's on the outside of the shed, it's quite a bit
Yeah.
from the shed.
Okay. So what is the cap rate within the shed? I haven't had a lot of parking lots
I
this year.
believe it's the same standard cap rate that we use, it's just the rental rates the stall rates that change.
Okay,
The reason for that is because, like I kind of spoke to, there is not a lot to maintain for surface parking, there is asphalting and a little bit of snow clearing, there's really nothing. You know, it is what it is versus if you had a parking structure or if you had a building, there's a lot more maintenance, there's a lot more capital investments that you need to maintain long term, whereas you don't have that for surface parking.
you also spoke about the upgrades to this building in 2011. Do you know what they were?
I didn't bring in the permit values because I didn't think it was, or the permits with the associated values that there was gonna be a contention. I believe they did build an envelope, they did the mechanical systems, they updated the building, but it was over the years series, but the last major one I believe was 2011, and then that's where you can see the picture itself. That's
Yes.
only so.
And you didn't have a chance to inspect it.
No,
No.
that's when I've seen file photos.
Right.
That's what-
Hey, thank you. That's all my questions. Mr. Navarro, you said you had some rebuttal?
Yes,
Just verbal
Yes.
rebuttal?
no, I've actually written,
Thanks, sorry, distributed.
Thank you.
I got flags for the whole document, so it's just labeled applicant rebuttal.
Oh, for everything?
Sorry, I'm just gonna check. Panel members, you've got the rebuttal?
Is that the one labeled applicant brief rebuttal?
Yes.
I have it's on the drive.
Got that, Mr. Page?
Sorry, was that just sent? Or was it in the agenda?
No, it should be in the package that was sent to you.
Yeah, it was distributed maybe about half an hour ago.
Well, yes, I found it.
Right.
Thank you.
If you'd like to proceed, Mr. Navarro.
okay, so we hit upon these two comparables during Nicole's presentation. Comps number 25 and number 32, that's 825 Sherbrooke and 77 Portage. So I'll start with comp 32, and that is HNQ Manitoba. I believe that stands for Her Majesty the Queen, Majesty the King now. And is this a semi-gross or a gross rent? That is the first question. Secondly, there is a picture there, doesn't really show it too well. It would be better if it was in color, but there was also a 12,314 square foot addition that was built in the back of this building. And I believe that would probably have some effect on that rent itself. Now, the second one pertains to 825 Sherbert Street. And we can see that this is in a medical area near the health sciences. I believe it's been occupied by WRHA, Cancer Care Manitoba. This is a, I don't know what you would call it, medical arts building, medical. And in general, I think those types of properties achieve higher rents in the marketplace. So first of all, I'd like, if possible, the assessor can speak to these comps.
Sure. As far as 32, that's exactly right. There was addition put on the back of the building. Most of it is office. It's just a comparable that we're using. So as far as net rent, that's what they were reporting. If they're, what I've been finding with the province is where all this being respectful all the way around. It's usually a semi-gross rent. But what I've been finding as I go back throughout the years, there's been a base year, and then it looks like there is off-roll adjustments to that base year once it gets approved by the province. So it's more of a net rent. I still waiting to get some leases for these properties, but we'll deal with that as we go on in this more level. So again, it's just one rent into them.
Right.
But as far as the other one, I have this one coming up on appeal with Shindigo. But yes, they're also mainly office, but not so much office medical as far as surgery. There's no surgery or anything like that. It's just cancer cares there. General office work and general offices, and there's a few other tenants as well in there. So yeah, you're right on that point, on both those points. So but again, that's only two rents into 59.
Okay, that was it.
Thank you. Did you have any questions in regards to the rebuttal?
No, we're just been reflective of the marketplace. You are going to get some higher rents in. We've been reflective of that. I don't think we're showing anything. So we just once you get up to a certain size building and some size tenancy, there is slim pickings for these size buildings. They're just the way it is. So
All right, thank you. Mr. Hardin, did you have any questions concerning the rebuttal to Mr. Navarro?
No questions.
Mr. Peich, questions?
I do not. Thank you.
I also have no questions. Do either of you have a wish for a summation on this property?
that took an hour and 10 minutes.
No more chat about parking lots?
I think that's the only one, actually.
No, I know.
Yeah.
Thank you. Panel members, do you wish for a short 5-minute recess, or are you okay to go on with the next property?
I wouldn't mind
Okay
the
to go
5.
on.
Oh, okay. I'm okay to go
Sorry?
on there.
No, please.
Mr. Hardin?
I would appreciate a 5-minute break right now.
All right,
Yeah.
we can do that. And I would like to call this meeting back to order, and we are going to proceed to our next property at 123 Main Street. And I believe there are no preliminary issues with this property, correct? Mr. Navarro?
No.
Yeah. So Mr. Cole, whenever you are ready.
Yes, this property has 2 points of revision. 123 Main Street, correct?
Yeah.
Yes. 2 points of revision. So the application came in for assessed value and classification.
Oh, sorry, no, that's not on us, though, that's on.
Mhm. Mr. Navarro?
Oh, you want? Sorry,
There's a class and liability.
I don't think there is a class and liability issue. There previously was when there was a school located there. But I don't think that they are there anymore. So I will ask for confirmation of the class code and
All
liability.
right. Thank you for that.
Okay, all right, yeah. I was going over. All right, straight quantum then, file number is 221641, roll number is 120977888500, civic address is 123 Main Street, 2023 assessment is for $19,006,000. Building was built in 1909, 1911, with an effective age of 1958. It's quite a large building. As you'll see on the next page, it's 169,394 square feet of leasable area, and we have 168 square feet of, or 168 stalls of outside stalls. So, as you can see on page 2, it's the VN building. It's the railway station building. So, older building. So this building, although I've not inspected the entire building, I have been in it. It is the old railway building. I'm sure many of us have been in it over the years. Same comparables that we're using for OCs apply for from pages 4 to 5. I do not need to get into them as we've already discussed that. On page 6, we have a $92 outside stall rate. We have 79 and 89 counts per stalls. We look back on the property. I don't think there's any potential install counts for the area borders for on page 2. Same areas, 77 Main Street, so same comparables. It produces on page 6 for the 168 stalls at $92 a stall, $185,472 for net operating income, capped at 4.5%. Again, gives $4,121,000, or rounded to $4,122,000. On page 7 is the overall workup for the building. As you can see, for 168,392, we've already discounted the rent to reflect the building itself at $8.71 a square foot. So we do know that this building is what it is. It's the old railway station. There is tenancies involved, but we downgraded this building for the rent to be more reflective of what the physical building is. So in the marketplace that it sits in. So that point, it's an under $9 rent overall. Potential rent is $1,476,130. We have a vacancy of 12%, our standard parameters, 12% for the vacancy. Expenses at non-recoverable 3%, extra for $10 produces a net operating income of $1,056,744, capped at a model capitalization rate at 7.1%, gives us our value of $14,884,000 rounded. So on the next page, we have page 8. The two summaries of the income streams summarized to $19,006,000. And with that, the obvious, on page 11 is the income and expense questionnaire. We don't have the stall counts or stall rates reported, but I'll let that go for today. The next page, we see the vacancy, they don't know, they marked down, they don't know, they marked down, they don't know the total leasable area. And it's the same imagery that the phone has memory. So it looks like someone was doing this at home and took some pictures and sent it in. So it's a little off the color, but I guess given the pandemic, that's perfectly acceptable in my mind's eye. And then the rent rolls on page 13. It's a collection of semi-gross rents. And then on page 15 and 16 is the COVID questionnaire. They indicated it was a significant impact for them as such.
as you can see, the rationale for it. So with that, I have no questions.
Thank you. Mr. Navarro.
Mr. Paul, this is a heritage property, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, and would you typically have slightly higher capital costs and maybe operating costs on a property of this age?
Overall, from that perspective, I would assume yes.
Okay, okay. So the reason for the rent being as low as it is, I mean, is that a combination of age, size, all of that put together?
Yeah, if you look at the building itself, it's a massive building.
Yeah, no doubt. I walked through it.
Yeah, that's why I was saying I've been in it, but I haven't been in all of it. Been all day there, you wouldn't probably be in all of it, but realistically, we're being reflective of what's the building is in the market where it's on, so.
Okay. And in terms of the parking, that was just model driven, correct?
Right.
Okay, and I have no more questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Harden, any questions to the assessor?
No, I don't think I have any questions.
Mr. Peich? Just one question, just to confirm what Mr. Navarro was asking, does this building actually have heritage status? Is it registered?
It would have to be the railway building, so.
Okay. Good, thank you. That's all my questions, Mr. Navarro.
Okay, this is 123 Main Street. And everybody knows this as the Via Rail Station, otherwise known as Union Station in Winnipeg. You can see a picture of it on page 6, overhead view on page 7, and a bird's eye on page 8. Again, this is a historic building. The effective age on it is 1975. I have my concerns about that effective age. I'll just leave it at that. But in walking through the building, I'm not sure that that is really the proper effective age for the building. There is a parking lot there, 143 stalls. Everything put together in terms of the land, 194,291 square feet, multiple use zone land. And on page 10, you can see the Heritage Railway Station of Canada. So this property was made a Heritage Railway Station in 1985. Designation date was 1989. And the construction dates from 1908 to 1911. I'll just distinguish between most heritage properties in this one. So most heritage properties actually fall under municipal legislation or municipal bylaws. This is probably one of those exceptions, and I'll get to that one after. So in terms of the rent, we've applied a rent of $8.91. Again, the overall size of this property is just, it's massive. And walking through it, you don't really get an appreciation of the scale unless you walk through it. So in terms of vacancy, well, we just went, I believe, with the standard market vacancy on this property, the standard shortfall, non-recoverable expenses as well. And where we differ, obviously, is in the capitalization rate. So we've gone with an 8% capitalization rate. That is typically where we start with heritage buildings. So again, $8.91. This is on page 19 if you're following. 12% vacancy, 10% shortfall of $10. There may be an error there. Yeah, yeah, that typically is a 5%. That was just a mistake on my part. Yeah. So typically we would include the 5% management. So that is missing. I can probably calculate that out. But let me keep going through this. If we require, do you require me to recalculate that out at this point?
I'm going to suggest when we take another break.
Okay.
You don't know.
Yeah.
And there's no contention. I know the argument we've missed and whatever the number come in to be on a break.
let it know.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so so far the indicated market value is 13,729,188. That will change because of the 5% adjustment on it. Let's flip to parking. In terms of the income on parking, we took 3 years. We looked at 3 years, 2018, 2017, 2020. Obviously, you can see the dip in the parking level. So we weighted at roughly 284, 346. We applied a 50% expense ratio, 142, 173 is our net operating income, and we applied a 5% capitalization rate to that. On page 21, you can see our summary for OFC and PKL, which is parking lot, and we have an income value of 16,572,648 combined. But again, I will have to recalculate the OFC portion out. So getting into the appendix, what I've included in there, and we can flip through a lot of this. It is the income and expense information. And part of the reason for having all of that in there is just to show that where I got these parking numbers from. On page 41, we have the historic, page 41, we have the, I guess the historic report. I believe this was done quite a while ago, based on the typing that you see on there. Next, we can flip to page 69. So this is where there's a distinction that has to be made between the heritage properties that are typical for the city of Winnipeg that fall under municipal bylaw versus this one, which is a heritage railway station. So there is an actual act of legislation, and this is federal legislation dealing with these particular types of stations and these particular types of assets. If you turn to page 73, so designation of the station has to happen through the minister. And once they are deemed to be an asset, they stay that way. There's a prohibition against actually selling these things, altering them, doing really anything with them without prior approval of, I believe it's governor and council. So, and it also comes with an offense and punishment section. So if you alter these buildings in a non-specific way, which isn't approved, you are liable to a fine, actually considerable fine. So this is not typical for any type of property, and that's because this is one of those heritage assets that we have across the country. It's different than the heritage properties that we see in the city of Winnipeg that are deemed heritage under municipal legislation. This is a higher arcing legislation that has more of an effect on what can be done with this property. So I would say that in terms of the risk associated with that property, I think at 8%, I think that's probably a good reflection. And I'll leave that there, and I'm open for questions.
Thank you.
Just a quick question, just no contention on much of what you spoke to. I mean, in the property itself, they simply don't build it anymore like this. This is relic. Nice relic. Wouldn't want to get that. Okay. Your stall count seems to be off. I've had this issue prior. Your north lot, I'm sure that it's both reflective. Have you counted for the south lot? That would be the difference in the
Possibly. That is possibly correct.
okay. So if we turn to page, and they're not numbered, but once we start from page 23, your appendix,
Yeah. For the $317,673 for the parking, if you take the 43 stalls, it works out to be $189 per stall.
Right.
So they're actually getting above a significant amount, $49 above, based on the 143 stalls. So this is where I was indicating more what was necessary. Why we're asking for non-compliance for a number of cycles now, to get the outdoor stall counts, the stall rates, and the parking to make a judgment call and see how it's performing. We see that there obviously is coinage, there's obviously after our income and market here, given the use of the building.
What I would say is that we're going by the gross income, so I don't know how important the stall count is. I mean, we've hashed this argument out more than once.
Just pointing it out. So
Yeah.
So my next question would be, of the $143 or 143 stalls, to speak right today, that's for this income. Is the south lot just for employees, meaning it's not encapsulated or generating an income?
What I've been told is that this is a reflection of the market income that they take in. So I can't fully answer that. Yeah,
because
that is what they've been reporting.
I would think the south lot would be included and it'd be the same rates, but it looks here like the north lot is the one that generates income, and the south lot might be reserved for employees.
Yeah.
All right, so that would be my next question. And then moving on, if you go on to the next INE, which would have been the 2018 INE, so there's $350,428 is what they gross for.
I got 48, but yeah.
Yeah, sorry, 20. That'd be about $331 based on 90 stalls, clothing more than 90 stalls. So they're kind of.
So just to be clear here, this is not just a typical parking lot. I mean, this would be like a parking lot at the Winnipeg airport. And remember, this is also a transportation hub.
There's going to be some variance, but what I'm saying is that lot shouldn't vary from 143 to 90, and then not including the south lot, which would obviously, I would think, given the performance of the other lot, generate some kind of income. So I'm just trying to get a feel for the actual value of what should be attributed to that working portion of the building.
Well, I mean, I think what we have to go by is what we've been told, which is that the reporting, 230, 681, 358 in 2018, 317.
All I'm trying to point out is, given the use of the building, although we discounted the building itself appropriately, the on-site performance of those lots, given the railway station, is significant.
We're not denying that. I mean, we are adjusting the income just to reflect less use during the pandemic period. We probably, that will probably continue. I don't know how that's changed at this point, but yes, I would say that this is a transportation hub.
So and I just want to, I know this argument's come up in the past for heritage buildings and risk, all the rest of it. Are you saying contemplating a change of use of this building? Would you figure this building would be changed, or is it just the maintenance of the property would be more?
The maintenance of the property would be significantly more. In fact, the work that has to be done has to be conducted by specialized people. That's not something that you would see regularly in the marketplace, other than heritage properties. But also the fact that you have to go through, some pretty extensive hoops and hurdles to actually do anything to the property. So if you hypothetically own this building and wanted to repair a large section of it, you have to undergo quite the process to actually get that done.
And that's where I'm kind of trying to separating between the expenses, how we do it, and the income, come to net operating income, and below line capital costs. It would be a greater below line capital cost in nature expenditures. Yes, for this particular kind of property, I would agree on that. But that's not something we would account for as far as how we assess a property, because we don't do those capital costs.
Absolutely, but we have to recognize it somewhere, and we recognize it in the cap rate.
We disagree. Case law disagrees with that. The only time I see capital costs be involved in this is all the boards I've
orders I reviewed is when a building physically or a property, say parkade, physically can't be occupied anymore,
Right.
the income stream is done. Then you start deducting the capital
So-
cost to repair, to bring it back to a level that could generate income.
So
we don't have that.
we do go by case law. I will agree with you there, but however, this property has never gone to the municipal board. So we can't, I don't think we can take anything meaningful from case law to really explain this property because it's never gone to the municipal board. And really, this is the only such property in Winnipeg like this that has this heritage status.
Down the road, but.
Okay. No.
You're about 100%
This-
Yeah.
50% wrong. Which way
This one is actually covered by a different legislation.
I know. So, okay, and that was my indicator that I was pointing out to the panel, that, yeah, in real terms, there would be more of a cost associated with maintaining a property like this for major expensive repairs. Not normal repairs, but major expenditures and capital costs, but from case law.
I might add just even minor ones, even repair of windows, those types of things. It's all done through specialized, I guess vendors, specialized people who install them. It's like owning an old 1960s, muscle car. Everything is going to have to be sourced separately from who knows where. You're going to have to find somebody who's going to be able to work on it.
So just so we're clear, I'm trying to make that to the panel. Case law says not to do it, but you're including it because it's a heritage building, and in real terms, real world, there would be, and I'm not denying that. But as far as our positions, that's where you're accounting for the difference in capitalization.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't see how anybody could not recognize it as a prudent investor. So yeah, we'll leave it.
All right, thank you. Mr. Harden, questions?
Yeah, just number one for Marcello's information, the total 7% expenses is 92,972. NOI of 1,003,1927.
Thank you very much for that.
Capped at 8% gives 12,899,082. The joys of a spreadsheet.
Thank you.
Okay, so if I take it right from Mr. Pohl's questioning, then the south lot is not included in the gross income shown on your page 20. Is that correct?
Well, we're not entirely sure about that. They haven't provided a stall count, and I will agree with Mr. Pohl that the stall count hasn't been provided. What we are getting is the income being reported. And, the stall count is something that we're able to calculate a gross stall gross stall rate on a monthly basis. It helps in that. But in terms of the grand scheme of things and trying to figure out the income value, it's not entirely necessary to have that stall count there. So there's a question mark there. We're not entirely sure.
As long as we're counting all the stalls, the income from all the stalls, I would
Yeah.
agree with you, but it
But
does
again,
leave some doubt whether all the stalls are included.
we're just as in doubt about the stalls not being included as we are as them being included. So it's kind of a 50-50 thing here. What we are 100% sure about is the income that's being reported here. So.
And I don't mean to interject, but just so we're clear, you go through that, and they also report $90 or not 90 stalls on another ID. So I just wanted to make it clear that there seems to be some variance in reporting of the stalls, but we're just being reflective of all the stalls, whereas they're showing it for 143. So I have no doubt that there's 143 in the north section.
Okay, thank you very much. No other questions then?
Thank you. Mr. Peitsch?
No questions, thanks.
I just have one quick question, Mr. Pohl. So this building had received this heritage status in '89. So when the modelers are looking at the cap rates, because this is such a unique building, do you know whether there any consideration is given to a second look?
I don't, I couldn't comment on that, like there would be, have to be, like you would have to source that from somewhere, otherwise it's just gonna be subjective, right? Like, and these don't sell, but when you're looking at the capitalization rate, what I think the when you're looking at the capitalization rate they can put in place, you're adjusting for the risk realistically in the rent. So when you're factoring that into the rent, you're saying what risk is there to a sub $9 rent in the marketplace. So I think in that terms, when you look at the cap, which is all points reflective of risk, I think when you're undershooting the marketplace by, you know, $4 or $5, it's pretty reasonable.
Great, thank you. Do either of you have a wish for a summation on this property?
I actually do have a summation on this building, so.
Yeah, I think I made it clear the difference of stall counts. That's the only thing I had issues with.
It has nothing to do with parking.
All right.
Yeah.
If you'd like to proceed.
So in summary, I think we have a property here that is unlike really any other property in Winnipeg. First of all, it's covered under a piece of legislation that's governed by the federal government. It can't really be sold. It can't really be altered in any way, meaningful way. And everything has to be approved through council. So there aren't many properties like that. And that is where we are deriving that additional risk from. Apart from the scale of the property, we know that's what's driving down those rents. But there aren't many properties like this. And even heritage properties within the municipality, within Winnipeg, are not, don't have these types of restrictions on them. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, we will move on to our third property, 180 Main Street. Stroll.
File number 222763, roll numbers 1209296000, 180 Main Street, 2023 value, assessed value is $7,556,000, and it is now 40 S exempt as it is occupied by Robertson. So I don't think there's any issue on that point. On page 1, built in 1949, has an effective age of 1977. I'm not sure what degree tenant fit up occurred for the new tenant in this location. I'm sure there was a residual amount, but nothing that I'm aware at this point anyways that would warrant an increase in effective age. So leasable area is 39,374 square feet. We have no on-site parking. I'll just skip to page 2. We can see where it's located and the frontage of the building. So if we go to starting on page 10 is where we sent the expense questionnaires. And I apologize, maybe a bit of a duplication in the income expense questionnaires, but on page 15, it shows that they were giving $240,000 of a tenant inducement, or essentially 6-month pre-rent for the first term. Again, once you have an anchor tenant, they come in. I've had this argument lots with Rod, and someone would carry tenant inducements we don't account for, but it is a tactic to get a tenant into your building. Just eat it for a little bit. We don't account for it in assessable value or reflection of that as case law prohibits it. In this case here, there's free rent. So this particular year, because it is the first year, is skewed somewhat from this, and I'll get into that as we go. So you have to look at it a bit more detailed look. But if you look on page 20, they indicate that it is a $12 rent. It's a little small, and I apologize at the top. and the term starts in 2020. So we're looking at the initial year. You look on page 22, their monthly charges for the entire year were, again, they're doing it on an annual basis of $239,244. That works out to be $6, which is exactly half, which is what you would expect because they have 6 months of free rent. So realistically, it doubled at $478,488 for the initial year. Some of this is going to be looked at as well. What I would remove from this is the realty tax appeals at $11,000, the expense at $11,109. They indicate that's what they paid for their tax appeal. I guess that's not something that would be accounted for as an operating expense for the building. So that's not something we would be including, redacting that out. Commissions as well, we don't include that. I'll get into that later when we do the power building. Commissions for $30,248 we redacted out as well. So when we look at that on page 23, ending before the interest expenses, because they don't have it quite summarized this way, from that point you would get $273,996 NOI. They don't show it there because after that they also include their mortgage interests, and then they amortize out some of the costs, which we wouldn't be including. Those are all full line items. It's just how they're particularly reporting. They're not really reporting enough net operating income at all, given the fact that it's being altered by the below line cost items and the 6-month tenant inducement of free rent. You really can't make anything from this other than, and again, I'll repeat the number for the first initial year. It should be roughly $273,996, and even at that point, it's still significantly under what the market would be at. So, with that said, let's explore the market. Starting on page 4 and 5, exact same comparables that we used. Oh, sorry, no, I apologize. These are the OFS comparables for different comparables. We have 89 comparables, 292,000 approximate square feet, CRU sizes of average between 3,200 or so, and median CRU size of 1,600 or so. The average rent is $15.85. The weighted average is $16.01, with a median at 15. So that's a nice tight average. And again, your min max, I'm not taking out all the outliers. We're still showing them, they're still included, reflected, but there's a few. But you know, you wouldn't expect a $10 rent, you can expect a $22 rent for buildings. So when we go through the building or the workup itself on the next page, we have an average rent of $14.18. That is above what they just signed in at $12. But again, I have some questions regarding the lease itself. I'll address that along. So for the PGI for the building it has a market of $14.18. It's $565,803. And our standard parameters apply to the PGI of 11% vacancy, non-reported expenses of 3%, $8 shortfall gives us a net operating income of $453,309. CapEx as percent gives us our $7,556,000. So again, when I spoke to that number of the initial year, which when you go through the subjective eye, it looks to be about 273,996 versus the model at leasehold contract versus the model of 452,369. It's kind of striking, but I'll have some questions regarding that coming up. But I feel based on market, the 7,556 is reasonable, and realistically, I need to know more about the leases that are in place. And I got $250,000 up front off, and what have you put into the building, and all the things that go along with it. And that means in an initial year report. And so, with that, I'm open to questions.
Thank you, Mr. Navarro.
Yes, so Mr. Paul, what I gathered from your information or your presentation is that you're not really too confident in the income and expenses that the owner has provided, correct?
They are what they are. They had 240,000 off in for 6 months. Usually when you get that off, you're putting something in to get that. And no one gives away anything for free. Usually an offset versus a long-term tenancy. A long-term tenancy, you're not gonna get that kind of free rent if you're only around for 3 years.
So is it your contention that the owner, manager has given the tenant a discount on their rent?
Well, for 6 months, they did give a discount, but I don't.
Well, we're not talking about the 6 month, okay, because nobody's talked about free rent here. We're talking about that $12 rent that's in place.
Again, I can't answer. I haven't looked at the lease and I haven't talked to the owner. That's part of the discovery of the.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of the capitalization rate, that is model driven?
Yes.
Okay, and your office tenancies are, there's quite a few of them, taken from all over the city. And you just have a couple that are close to that size, correct, that we've already addressed in the rebuttal? Okay, those are my questions, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Harkin, did you have any questions to the assessor?
Yeah, just why is this an OFS and not an OFC?
Typically OFSs are 3 stories or less. There are some downtown, arguably, given the condition of the building, I sometimes use OFS and OFC comparables interchangeably, depending on the condition of the buildings. If you know the buildings well, that market can be put against this market here and vice versa. It's just, OFSs tend to be more on the outside of downtown area, so.
Okay. Okay, and that goes into the cap rate because this one is significantly lower than the previous 2 that we've done either by either party's measure then. All right. I have no other questions.
Thank you. Mr. Pike, did you have questions to the assessor?
Have you had an opportunity to go through the building?
Not through the building. I did handle somewhat their classification change from to 40S. And we reviewed the documentation of what was done. I was in this building at one point, I think it was, God, years ago. I think it was a restaurant or Earl's or something.
Grapes on Main.
Grapes, great. There you go. There you go. I didn't think it was Earl's. I knew it was something like that. But yeah, years and years ago. So, but I mean, as far as being a recent inspection after Robertson took over, no, I have not.
Thank you. No other questions.
Great. That's right. It's long.
Thank you. And I have no questions. Mr. Navarro, if you'd like to proceed.
This is 180 Main Street. Again, this is now the new, I guess, headquarters for Robertson Career College in Winnipeg. You can see some pictures on page 6 of the property. And on page 7, a brief description of the property, originally built in 1949. But again, it's been updated. And if you can, just flip to page 11 and 12. So we have looked at some market comparables as well. We are using a mix of older properties /C also, but realistically, we didn't think that we had to deviate from the actual rent in place because it was negotiated in January of 2020. There will be steps beyond this. This is a 15-year term. So we think this is market, and it's been written in the income and expenses that the owner has provided. So we do not see a need to question this rent. Again, on the question of income and expenses, we largely ignored those expenses. We ignored any free rent. We ignored any inducements. This is simply the net rent that you see in place on page 27, which works out to $12 per square foot. And again, stressing that this was negotiated just before the reference date, well, a year before the reference date. We think this is as close to market, and that's why we feel this is a better representation of what market value, market rent would be for this location. In terms of the other parameters, if you turn to page 15, we can see the income approach summary. So we've applied a vacancy of 11%, shortfall of $8 per square foot, management of 5 and other 2. So that is the 7% that we always talk about. And in terms of the capitalization rate, as an OFS, we think that this is at the better end of the scale for us. So we've applied a 6% capitalization rate to it as well. We come up with an indicated market value of $6,015,923 or $6,016,000 rounded. And the remainder of the presentation is simply just the income and expenses and the COVID questionnaire. So I am open for questions.
So just so we're clear, page 15, your work up on page 15, the difference is rent by about $2.19. And the only other difference that I can see is the 5% versus the 3%.
Yeah, we're agreeing in most areas. Yeah.
So can you turn to your page? I'm going to address it here. 27. It is the rent roll.
Okay.
It shows from July 1st, 2020 to 2023, 2.5 years or 3 years, I should say, with 6 months of that being free rent. But it really only shows 2.5 years of the 15-year term at $12. What are the step ups? Is there any step ups?
Yeah, I would say that in the following, you'll see step ups.
Well, what did they step to? Are you getting it discounted for the first couple of years? And is it going to 15? Is it going to 16? Is it going to stay at 12?
Well, that's post-reference date information. How can I?
No, but you would know it. No. For the examination of use of this $12 rent in context of the 6 months free rent, and then getting into whether Robertson paid for the renovations or anything that needed.
I understand what you're saying, Mr. Pohl, but what we are showing here is the rent of $12. That is the base rent,
Right.
Until 2023. So the free rent wouldn't affect future years.
That's not quite what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if you have a free rent at 6 months, and then for 2.5 years, which is a small amount of period of time, you're in at 12,
Right.
And you know full well that it's increasing a significant amount.
Averaging it out.
You're giving a discount to a tenant in the beginning, and then you're putting that at market.
No.
Then that wouldn't be a reflection of market.
That's not a reflection of what's happening.
Okay.
We would have been told.
Have you examined the lease?
I myself haven't examined the lease, but we would have discussed that with the property manager to see if that rent is not actually a net rent that's actually correct, not including any type of free rent, inducements, all of those. We eliminate those. This rent has been verified to us, $12.
I don't doubt that it's $12 at this particular point in time. I'm just questioning.
No, what you're saying is that the rent is being lowered artificially, either
As an
through some type of
incentive to get-
inducement or something,
As an
which we
incentive to get
don't.
it to
No,
8,
we don't do that.
Okay, all right, I mean, I have it read the right way.
Remember
No,
that the
no.
term of it is 15
Yeah.
years.
Can I finish? At the point of the reference date, this entire lease would be known, and the entire steps would be known. It would not be post-reference, an event that hasn't occurred yet, but we would know what the rents that would be in place would be. Right, so what I'm saying, there's no way to subjectively review to see whether, if it increases to $13 and maybe 14 at the back.
Well, we have had this isn't the first property that we've discussed where we've had this argument about whether we are actually including some type of inducement in the rent. And, again, we're saying the same thing. We're not including any type of inducement in that rent. We're not lowering it. That is the base rent. That is the first step.
And then I don't know if you answered it or not. Was Robertson responsible for paying for any of the fit up for their particular?
That I can't answer. No.
Yeah, so, all right. That's all the
Okay.
question.
Thank you. Mr. Harden, any questions?
No questions.
Mr. Peich, questions?
Questions, thanks.
And I have no questions. Thank you. Do either of you have a wish for a summation on this property?
No, I think I've made my point clear.
That's good, thank you.
All right,
Also trying to figure it out.
that's fine. I think we're okay in terms of time. Going to move on to 287 Broadway. And
Right, file number 22-1759. Roll number is 12-09-326-3000. Address to Executive Broadway. 2023 assessment is for $7,550,000. We have an actual year built of 1956. We have an effective year built of 1987. This building experienced significant renovation from, and I'll kind of, it's not in the brief, but I don't think all this is not all of this. From 2010 and onwards, they spent approximately $6 million, a little over $6 million on the property. They renovated the property, and they put in a small underground arcade into the basement area as well. So there's 19 stall indoor arcade in the basement. So it has experienced some renovation. We go on page 2 and page 3. Sorry, I should speak. And there's approximately 53,103 square feet of leasable area. So we go on page 2 and 3. We can see the renovation of the property. Just so we're clear, the envelope that you see they worked on as far as improving it. If you go around to the back 2 sides, it looked like they just painted the brick. They didn't do anything around the back, so more of a facelift to that envelope. But they did put in an underground arcade on the bottom basically on the back. So on page 4, there was a sale in 2009. I think that is outdated. Again, it's quite a bit off. I didn't put any weight to it. They said 2.1 million. Again, no weight that I put to that as well. Page 5 and page 6 are the OFC comparables that we've already spoke to. I don't need to go into that any further as they're the same from the first appeal. On page 7 is the workup for the property. We have overall $12.53 applied to the 53,102 square feet for a potential gross income of $665,495. Our standard parameters to that apply at 12% for vacancy, expenses non-report about 3%, shortfall at $10 gives us a net operating income of $504,345, capped at 6.69%. So again, the cap at that gives us our $7,257,000 rounded. So on the next couple pages are the downtown comparables for underground parking. I'm sure you've seen this if you've been underground parking. It is prepared by Lindsay Warhound and then employed by the departments. Look on the next stall count. Page 10, we have a $90 underground parking. So that does seem a little low on my end. But reflected from downtown parking, it should be higher than that at around $103 a stall. But that's what the model put in, and I'm not at this point going to ask for an increase on 19 stalls for $13 a stall net back. I think it's reasonable enough. I think parking for the net operating income then works out to be $20,520 capped at 7%, gives us $219,143. So on page 11 is the summary of the 2 income streams, which summed to $550,000. And that's where I was getting. If you look at the 2 income streams, quite frankly, the $19 arcade, the $19 stall arcade, whether it's $13 more or not,
It's not really gonna swing an investment purchase one way or the other. So. If we look over to page 16 is the INE that's reported. There's a COVID letter or COVID questionnaire attached to it as well. But they enter their INE online. If you look at the top right-hand corner, they say they have 19 stalls at $240, $245 a stall net. Or sorry, for their stall. So, and then below that, they have 7 stalls for outdoor parking. I'm not sure where the outdoor parking on this at $775 a stall. I don't know, unless there's something that they're using. I drive by this all the time. There's no stalls there. I totally. That's what the point. So again, the main thing I wanted to get through is obviously when you have a limited amount of parking for a building the size, it's much more demand. Downtown parking is strong. It's $245 a stall because probably there's only about a dozen or so people in there or whatever executive type, owners companies that are going to purchase or going to use that parkade. For me, when I'm looking at this, and when they converted it, I was almost wondering why they did it. The cost to it versus the income that you get from it doesn't really, it seems like a bit of a barrier to do it, but they did it. So, at the end of the day, from an investment standpoint, whether it's our model that should be 103 or 90, what we have, or if you want to work out the actual numbers from where they're coming from at $245, it's a nominal difference. The building itself is worth the values. That's why I'm kind of getting at. So it's a little atypical to see someone invest the money when they're renovating their building and simply put in a parkade aside. It just, I know the cost involved, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but it did. At that point, we have the rental that's in place below pre-examination. It's a little small, I apologize, but I'm handcuffed with what they report and how they report. So with that, I'm open to questions.
Thank you. Mr. Navarro.
Yeah, just some quick questions. So this is all model driven, obviously. OSC rents, and have you been in this building?
No, I've looked at pictures of the building, but I haven't actually been in it. Okay. I didn't really see the need to. It seemed to be an average at best OSC. And they did some renovation work to account to it. And then surprisingly, the parquet part was like just like, is that right? They did that and they did that. So so be it.
Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Harden, questions?
No questions, I guess.
And Mr. Page, questions?
I have no questions, thanks.
Just have one quick question. How much was the parking lot? What was the cost of the rental?
The rental? That's what for the renovations for the building itself, or just for the
Both. Do you have them separate?
I haven't told. It was 6.6, a little over 6.1 million for the permits from starting in 2010 up until we have up until 2021, but the renovation would have been 2010 to about 2012, I believe. So we have my goal in it here, about a little over 4 million.
So the parking lot.
And there is not parking lot, it's parking structure.
Sorry, the structure. That's what it.
Underground parking. Yeah, so and that's where I was kind of getting it's like because it was a plan run. I can do the numbers. It doesn't justify putting in a parkade with a limited amount of stalls you have. You can't justify putting that in to capture the cost unless there's something I'm off on. But they did it anyway, so that's why it was kind of like, but I mean, they don't really with the license properties, so that's what they did. It's just investment to recapture just doesn't seem to be there, but it is now, and that's what they're valuing it now.
Well, maybe Mr. Navarro's gonna invite us.
It's a little quick here there. It's like when we went through, it's like I just can't understand what they did.
If you'd like to proceed.
Okay. So 287 Broadway. I had an opportunity to inspect this building. It's not the first time actually. First time was in September 2019, but I did it more recently as well. So This is a peculiar building, as Mr. Polk said. Why put in a 19-stall parkade? The costs alone are just astronomical. However, within those costs, and I'm flipping to the description of the property. So as you can see on the picture on the side there, you can tell that they've done some renovations to the envelope. They've also done renovations to the front lobby, to the elevators, to much of the HVAC systems, water, electrical. So a lot of this stuff was capital related, not necessarily something that's going to affect the rent in the end. It just needed a lot of work. This is, I believe, a 1950s building, and a lot of the buildings on Broadway were, well, there were a few buildings on Broadway that were built in the 1950s. It just needed those updates. So those have been done. In terms of the rent that we looked at, so you can see on page 14 that we've gone with the actuals, and in some cases we've applied a rent that we think is fitting of the fit and finish of the particular space. So you'll see that there's a difference here, and there's a huge disparity in the rents here. And that is probably a reflection of some of the renovations that have been made to it, whether through, you know, the owner or tenant improvements. The rents are high, for example, for the first space of $20,754, because those renovations are reflective of that rent. They put quite a lot of work into that space, occupied by a single tenant. And again, you see higher rents on the 3,128 square feet and 5,857 square feet, where I've put in a rent for vacant spaces of $10 and $12. When you walk through these spaces, you see that nothing has been done to these spaces in, I would say, decades. So we are valuing what's there. We're not valuing a property or a space based on potential tenant improvements that will be made in the future. They're vacant for a specific reason. We put a lower rent on them because they can be occupied. There's still office space there. It's just that it hasn't been renovated for a very long time. So that is why those rents tend to be lower. And you'll see the lower rents are likely a reflection of the fact that not many improvements have been made over the years. So we have a $14.71 blended rent over $54,383 or 54,383 square feet, giving us market income of $800,154. The next page over, we get into vacancy issues, capitalization rate. In terms of the summary on page 18, well, we obviously applied a slightly higher vacancy rate, and that is 17%. A shortfall of 10, management of 5, other 2, and a cap rate of 7.75. In terms of the surface parking, we don't disagree with it. We've simply agreed to the $293,000 that has been suggested by the model. If you look at the summarized approach, you can see that we are at $7,068,045 in total, and the assessment is $7,843,000. Obviously, the difference is capitalization rate. On parking, there is no real contention there. So on the first stream, which is the OC, capitalization rate and slight vacancy difference. So I'm open for questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, I do. Let's start on the INE, which is on your back 4 pages. The obvious one that I pointed out, 19 stalls, they put in an underground parkade at $245 a stall. Even at that rate, it really doesn't seem to justify the cost of putting in the parkade. I can't. Some people just.
You're never going to recover.
Yeah, but we're valuing it as it sits, not the investments that took to get it. So we're fine with the rent on that. Outdoor parking, there is no outdoor parking here. Is this an?
I walked around the building. I don't
There is
know.
nothing there. I don't agree. So this must be from an off-roll rent, just as property owner own another property close to it or something like that.
I maybe they're leasing spots and getting that money back. I don't know. There is no additional parking to this, so
Okay,
I walked around the property, so
we're on the same page, okay.
Yeah.
So my next question would be, they also fill out the average leasable area vacant space at 0%. They left it out. So I'm at a bit of a loss when I'm going through the rent roll. When I'm looking at unit 200.
Yeah.
Looking at 205.
yeah.
8,469 square feet, 1,084 square feet. That's at least, 9,500 or so square feet into the rest of the building. That still doesn't equate to the level that you're at. They're the only 2 units that are not occupied.
Yeah, exactly. So
So we have
an entire floor that's not occupied.
so 200 is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we have a smaller area of 1,084 square feet, and then another smaller area of
Where would those be?
11.7. I don't remember. They're I don't know, somewhere third or fourth floor or something like
Okay,
that.
so what I'm saying is I don't see that on the record reporting. So
Yeah.
my next question would be, obviously, when you're trying to piece this back together, and I've looked at the building in the past, but other people just kind of, it's one that you pause on. But you have on your rent roll. And I'm sure this is exactly as such. We have, you're saying for 20,754 square feet, the $22.25 is one tenant.
That's over several floors.
Yeah, but one tenant.
Yeah.
And that's reflective of the costs of the tenant improvement, so that those CRUs.
Yeah.
Effectively are in better condition than the rest of the building. And the owner is charging back the tenant in the usual way.
Yeah.
Not the other way where the tenant would typically get a discounted rent if they paid for some
That's
or
right.
all of. And you would see a tenant induced rent. So in this case here, it's a true market rent with the owner being responsible for the capital improvements to the property, which is typical. Okay, so we got that done. The rest of the rents, not the $10 or $12 rent, but I'm looking at, because those are what you feel market is, because those are vacant, correct?
Right.
So for the rest of the rents at $6 and $5 and $3, these are substantially under.
Yeah, again, month to
quality,
month,
like to the point.
the other one has a term of almost 10 years.
I noticed that.
And again, it's likely a reflection of the fact that nothing has been done over
See, and that's
decades.
the thing, like when I'm looking at this building overall, it looks like it
Yeah.
went through a renovation and it looks like it was a stalled renovation. Whereas
I mean, and I can take you through the renovations. The envelope was done. A lot of the building mechanicals were done. Elevators, they put in that stupid parkade.
So my next line of those question again was, given that these are monthly rents and low rents and arguably, anticipate over the years, including over the years.
Yeah.
These are $5 to $7 per storage for lower grade buildings and, above 7 to 12 or upper B prime to A buildings.
Sure.
For storage rates, these are under that. Are they, the ownership group, waiting for a tenant to come aboard
to renovate these and share and do typically what they did for the other 20,000, meaning these are very liquid tenancies that they're just waiting to get it. To someone come in and.
There's been no lack of marketing yet on these properties.
That means into that, so.
Yeah, so I don't know why they haven't been able to rent up these spaces. It's a real question mark.
And that's where I'm going with it, right?
Yeah.
So leading into that, there was obviously a game plan to renovate the property. They got one tenancy in place, they're achieving what they want, put parkade in, okay. But the remaining 3 or so rents that are in place are liquid. Are there any who's the brokerage involved? What are they asking? What is the term?
Collier is the broker on it.
Have they express what they want? Because obviously this is a reduce it to base and build back up for tenant.
Absolutely.
So what would be?
I'm sure if you wanted to go in there and rent 8,000 square feet, they would gladly rent it to you. It's just there has not been any bites on this.
Right. So,
and it's been an ongoing thing because we can look back at different cycles and this building has always had some issues there. That's why we've always managed to get a reduction on this property. In fact, I've had recommendations for reductions in the past on this property.
well, obviously I know a question, the line of question I'm asking you. So my question is, as a projection, as it's moving forward, you have one tenancy in place for half the building, which is good. The other leases are in place waiting to be effectively ended. You can essentially look at it like it's vacant, but something's there and they're waiting. So
Absolutely.
it's better than being empty.
But both of us,
They're still getting
exactly, both of us know that there's an issue getting tenants at this point in the market.
And the last piece of the puzzle is, which I'm asking you, and if you don't know, just say, so what is, again, you've seen this through Colliers, but what is the actual rent that's being sought?
I don't know about that. Yeah, sorry. No.
All right, that's the only question I have.
Thank you. Mr. Harden? You're muted.
No questions.
Thank you. Mr. Peich?
Quick question. With the existing tenants, are they all known to be arm's length?
Arm's length? Yes. Yes.
Okay, thank you. No other questions.
Thank you. Just in regards to the marketing of this building, both of you have pictures of this building. Do you know when those pictures were taken? I believe on pages 3 for you.
For me,
Mr. Cole, and page 8 for you.
It-
Mr. Navarro, it's
Yeah.
the same picture and it's got the leasing on the outside. So I'm just wondering, does anybody
that's
know
why-
when that was taken?
Yeah, it could be Cushman, actually. No, Remax.
Just so we're clear, I take the file photo at the reference, the spring of the reference date. This is straight from the.
Oh, there's no issue at all with that because this picture has been there for years. Okay, so there's no question on that.
But my follow-up when I do my market research is also to see what's being advertised. I can't find anything on this property. That's why I was asking who's doing it. It said Remax. I thought it was there.
But I know because I walked in with Collier's people
So if
as
you're
well.
saying it's Colliers now, then it's no longer them. My question is, I mean, realistically, it seemed to be like a bit of a stalled or staggered renovation to this property. Whereas you got a little more than a third of the building where you want it, and you have some tenancies in place that are effectively keeping the lights on, but you're ready to get rid of them at a moment's notice to your.
The problem is just getting these tenancies in there, so in the market now, and it is what it is.
Okay, do either of you have a wish for summation?
Yeah, I'll brief one. It looks like this was a planned renovation that took a little longer than most. It looks like there are some areas of the building that you could effectively consider it a vacant but waiting for tenancy, and you have someone paying a bit, might as well have it, right? They did put an underground parkade, and that is marketable. That is very marketable. You can see the rest of it associated with it. And I would not put any weight to the capital cost involved to get it to that point, because we're not valuing that, we're just valuing and the expenses as it sits. But overall, it looked like it was a lower grades
lower grade C, and now it's at least an average to maybe a bit more than average. It just once you get the tenant minutes for the remaining CRUs and whatever rental rates that came in at, you could then call it a bit more than an average C, but at this point, I would consider it an average to a hair is above an average. So.
I could summarize that. I mean, I hate to use terms like pig with lipstick on it, but that's kind of what it is. This building is not very functional. I don't know the reasoning for the parkade. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And in terms of what had to be done in terms of the capital, it needed to have something done to it in terms of the mechanicals in it. The original mechanicals, as I understood, they were pretty much replaced, but that really doesn't has no effect on the rent. So, yeah.
Thank you. We have 4 properties left and it's 3:30.
I have someone picking up my husband and mentioned on that break. I have someone picking up my son, so I can keep going.
Great, thank
It
you.
doesn't always work that way. I try to be accommodating, but usually it's a no for me. So. All right.
We will move on to 260 Hargrave.
Okay.
Oh, wait, before we move on,
Yes.
I just need to know how you like to address the classification on this property.
Yes, I noticed that. On the
Last
record.
word confirmation on it.
Confirmation, okay, thank you.
I didn't see anything that wouldn't be. Since we can go a little longer, do you want to take 5 minutes? I can.
Absolutely. I just take a 5-minute break, panel. And I would like to call this meeting back to order, and we're going to proceed to item number 5, which is 260 Hargrave Street. And Mr. Poole, the floor is yours.
Roll number is 12097618 file number is 221263. Specific address is 260 Hargrave. It's a powerhouse building. Grain powerhouse. This was a much older building. I think we all know it. It was renovated in 2000. We have an effective age from 2000 to 2006. The best way of saying it was restored and then it added on to it. It's not just a building that was had a renovation. It was substantially restored and added on to. So I've been in this building, the appeal. CTV building on one side, and then it's Canadians on the other side, Tavern United. I went through both. Tavern United, I go to quite frequently. CTV News Studio, and their associated programming is also on the other side. It's quite a nice space, much above grade, it's much above finished area. There's a number of years ago, I think I went through with Mr. Becker, if I'm not mistaken. But anyways, so I don't think there's any contention on the quality of the building. It is a above average building. We have it as a Class B building, obviously restaurant. There indicates there is a parking structure and there is 19 stalls. I'm assuming that is correct. I did not go through the parking areas. If you look on page 4, shows the stall area. The building is, it's kind of underneath the building. Not really a parking structure per se, just underneath the actual building itself. Moving on from that point. For outside parking, right, we have $103.50 a stall. That's quite reasonable. For 19 stalls, again, it's a minor component to the major overall assessed value. But the net operating income from that is $23,598, capped at 7%, and that gives you $337,000 rounded roughly for that portion of the assessment. You look on page 7, the OFE portion, we have for 61,438 square feet, $15.72, which produces a PGI of 965,936. With our standard parameters applied to it, vacancy at 11%, expenses at 3% unrecoverable, shortfall at $12, which produces a net operating income of $752,795, capped at 6.75%, which gives us rounded 11,153,000. So again, I went through the space. Some of it is quite high. All of it is above average, but some of it is quite high quality. It's their studio, and if you've ever been on it, you have to be very quiet because they're actually through. But they have and when we went through, there was quite a number of support staff and services to get their programming on board, as you would expect. So again, it's quite a nice building. So on the next page over, page 8 is the restaurant, which is Tavern United. It doesn't show it here because we don't assess open air, but there is a rooftop patio. It's quite nice. Expensive, but quite nice. And then you have the lower restaurants as well. So right next to adjacent to the obviously the largest economic driver in the downtown, which is now Canada Life Center. So from that rent, we have $25.88 put on the 9,630 square feet, which produces $249,431 PGI. Our standard parameters again for restaurants, 6% for vacancy, expenses at 3% recoverable for non-recoverables, and shortfall at $8 per square foot gives us a net operating income of $322,805, capped at 6.4%, and our capitalized value for that is $3,481,000. So the next summary on that is page 9. And those are the 3 income streams, which summarize the $14,971,000. So moving on from there, you see that the rent roll starts, or if it's in the INE that we asked for, starts on page 12. They left it blank. In lieu of that, they put in they obviously responded to the COVID questionnaire as well. And with that, they actually put in the financials. So as you can see, they have their income statement from pages 18, 19, 20. We go on. Next page over. Their net income, just so unadjusted for anything that we would take off. Obviously, other expenses, which is mortgage interest, amortization of TIs, you would be taking and redacting that out. They report $410,000, but obviously you'd be adding up the other expenses, at least that much back in. And then there's a consulting other fees at $98,000, which is a little suspect because that is considerable amounts or just that. But realistically, we're looking at a market valuation and not a leasehold contract, but those are things to consider if you're going to be looking at the subject property's performance. On page 21, it's a little blurred in mine, but that's the rent roll. It's Tavern United and then True North, and then obviously the television CTV or the other tenants for the office areas. In this year, it's a little off because they don't report, at least they don't report the terms. So it seems to be more reflective of what they're paying, but not the terms itself that are associated with it. They have in the past. But again, moving on from that. I did a large OFB study and I'll just kind of go over it quickly. The chair has heard this OFB study, so I'm not going to get into it in too much detail. It's there for your reading. We have a summary cover page, and then 2 summary pages of explanation as to how and why we've done it. This is something I employed for the OFB market and the OFA. So I looked at all the OFAs that rent and all the OFBs that rent, and I did a 6-year analysis on every individual property. Performance of the properties, as well as did it on a global perspective, meaning all the properties reflective of what the marketplace summates to. I did it on an individual perspective for each 6 year for each property. And then I did it from a Johnson perspective and a Johnson report perspective and a Cushman Wakefield perspective, which are leasing asking rates for those years associated well. So what I've done is essentially every single year, I put all the parameters in relationship to each other: the vacancy, the shortfall, the non-recoverable expenses, the rent. You see, and what the actual marketplace has been and what it's reflective of. And then all the model rates anyways that came with all the buildings that we have on these property type classes were vetted through this study to ensure that they had fair and equitable assessments. It's the best tool that's been presented at a board level. And it hasn't done anything this forward yet. This cycle is the start of this, and it's going to move forward. You'll be seeing this year after year. For fee simple valuation, it examines how performance of the buildings on an individual basis, but also within the marketplace. And it minimizes tenant expenses. So I'll let you read through it. It's a short read and pretty self-explanatory, but for this here, on page 25, there's page 4 of the study. We have an average rent of $14.39 a square foot. And I can go through the vacancy and everything else that goes along with it. And that's stabilized over 3 years. If you're looking at just the individual 2020 year, the average weighted rent was $14.94 a square foot. So what I've done is essentially to stabilize the last 3 years, typically as I would if I'd be going into this board level appeal, to give a fair review of the property type classes for this. These are such substantial properties that you should really be looking at more than 1 year. In this case, we've looked at 6 and we're stabilized in the back 3 years, or the closest 3 years, the reference date. As any prudent investor would look at the performance of a property, and obviously if they're purchasing a property, they're going to be looking outside the assessment scope and looking at future incomes coming back to them and what they feel the market is going forward in the future. But we can't do that. We can only do up to the reference date. So that's what we're doing here today. And that's reflective, I think, with what's on the roll for above average property. So for above average property, we have $15.72 a square foot. And in that year, like I said, for an average, it's $14.94, and stabilized over 3 years, it's $14.39. So realistically, when you have a $15.72 rent, I think that's realistic. It's about $1.25 above the average. And this particular property, given it's the renovation that occurred and the tendencies that are in it, is well reflective of a little bit increase. So with that, I'll move on from the 4B. You can read through the study if you like, and the variables that you want. It's all at your fingertips. So the next portion of it is your restaurants variables. That's on page 31. I looked at all the restaurants downtown from 2012 and moving up to the reference date. I broke them out to shed districts, which is what this one is in, and then just outside of it as well. So in the shed district, we see Tavern United, which is 260 Hargrave, and the rents that are associated, and at the reference date, they're at a $22 rent. And you can see that the average weighted rent overall for not only for Tavern United, but you can look at Brown Social House, you can look at the Merchant, you can look at Shark Club, anything that's associated with close proximity to, obviously right next to the Canada Life Center, you're going to be getting well north of $20 a square foot. So those are the rents that are there. You can look through them if you like, and with the rent that we have in place. We have a $25.88 rent. So again, although it's $22 in effect, for the subject property, we can see the comparables that are also there. Brown Social House at $35, Merchant at $30, Shark Club at $24, which is a little bit more reflective of where it's at. So I think overall, given the reference date, I think a $25, $26 rent is more reflective of if the tavern were to release and, you know, put market rents in. If they were to re-sign, that's roughly what they would be re-signing at. It just happened to be that Capital United was one of the first properties to do this. They were back well before NHL came back. So, and that lease is still in place from them. So with that, I am open to questions.
Thank you.
All model driven. Those are my questions. Sorry.
Mr. Harden, questions to the assessors?
Okay, on your OFB study,
Yeah.
would it be fair to say 2020, maybe 2019, you're beginning to see the effects of the True North Square and the tumble down effects of that?
Well, I mean, obviously with that complex putting up, that property owner would be canvassing the marketplace. You're not going to be putting up that kind of project with estimates of what you think you can get. You're going to do due diligence and know what tendencies are going to be coming on board, or at least commitments from certain tenants. So, yeah, you would definitely be seeing that. I left out, and just so we're clear, if you look at page 25, I left out on the OFA study the True North complex, because quite frankly, it's a double prime. You can call it is marketed as a double prime. It is greater than and better than the rest of the Class A building in the city.
Yeah, it'd be OFA.
By a substantial amount. The rents involved there are $28 starting roughly averaging about $30 triple net, and they escalate up if you look at the leases to $35, $37 triple net. That is substantially different from anything else in the city. The only building that I would say that's on par with that is owner occupied, which is Hydro Building, which is even better than arguably. I shouldn't say even arguably. It's owner occupied for utility company. It is better than True North, but it's state of the art, world renowned, and I can get into all of it. But I mean, realistically, those are the two pinnacle properties in the city. One is owner occupied, and one is obviously income generating. And I do believe there is some owner occupied spaces in there as well. I haven't reviewed it in full as part of another section. We'll probably do that as we go on. But I excluded them from the marketplace. And yeah, it wouldn't be a trickle down effect. You're going to see that superiority of building pulling the OFA and some OFB tenants out of the market, and then the market shifting as which we've seen to fill and compete with itself. And essentially what I'm hoping to answer your question is, as time goes on, you're going to see these musical chairs, those terms, or what we're going to see is your better performing A's and B's that have invested in tenant improvements are going to take that marketplace, and then there'll be a trickle down to your C's and your less properties that maybe can't afford to do that. That's where I'm speculating where it's going to go. And you can see that when you look at what's happening at 360 Main and a 204, the absorption that they've had in the marketplace there. Richardson Building's a little off on that because there's a lot of occupied space in that building. But typically, yeah, when you have a player come in and have a 600,000 square feet come into the marketplace, it's going to affect it. And you're going to see it in the A's and the B's here, primarily more in the A's, but as we go through time, you'll see the B prime as well. So,
okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Keitch, any questions?
I have no questions. Thank you.
I also have no questions. Thank you. And Mr. Navarro.
Okay, I will try and make this as quick as possible, so I'll just ask you to flip to page 15. So we have a rent of $17.61. That's the rental rate. 59,515 square feet. This is for the OFB portion. And a market income of $1,047,874. If we look at the restaurant income on page 17, we are actually only accounting for 9638 at 2022 for a rent of 194,888. And then I'll flip to the OFB summary on page 19. An 11% vacancy, shortfall 12, non-recoverable 7% capitalization rate. Indicated market value 11,268,074. On the restaurant, you can see again on page 20. Our market income is 194,888, 6% vacancy, shortfall 1299, 7% non-recoverables, net operating income of 178,825, capitalization rate of 6.75, income valuation of 2,649,258. And on page 21, you can see the parking value of $51,300. Net is 25,650 after expenses. We put an expense ratio of 50% on this one. Cap rate of 7%. That comes out to a market gross of 225 per stall. Comes to a value of 366,429. All combined, 14,283,761. And the rest of it is just income and expense information that's been provided by myself and the assessor. So I'm open for questions.
Thank you.
Essentially, I have no questions. Your work has been very close to ours.
Yeah, it is.
Mr. Harden, any questions?
Okay, just on the rentable area for the office, you have 59,515 and the city has 61,438. Why the difference?
So I can't speak for the cities, but we get ours off of the rent roll. So we are accounting for the space as documented in the rent roll.
Okay, that leads to the question, Mr. Poole, how did you come up with your area?
We have essentially the same. We go through with the building inspector when they do it. So when there's a bid put in or a business assessment for a particular business, we'll take that leasable area and we basically summate them up. We also verify that with the rent roll. Having said that, we are a 75% difference, right? Or roughly I didn't do the number, but I don't put much weight to it because like I kind of try to explain, if it's a 2 CRU building and we're out by a certain, we can make an adjustment because typically those CRUs don't change all that much. But as you go up in building like a OFB or a Class A, you have so many tenancies and they're always being changed. You expect a bit of variance from what we have for what the agent may have. And that's primarily because you're changing the business mixes, moving it out, that the tendency change. So in this case here, I'm not gonna, it's so close that it's nothing that variance would, in my mind's eye, I'd be expecting it. So hopefully that answers your question. It's not nothing that I would ask for an increase on or change to. It's are the natures of the buildings of these type of buildings.
All right. Now, Mr. Navarro, I was kind of scratching my head on your restaurant calculation here. If you have an EGI of 194,888 and you take off 11,000 and change for vacancy, how do you come up with 200,362 for effective market income?
So if you notice above it, there is the 10,487.
Yeah.
Okay. So That is actually the leased area that we have calculated. So derived from that, it is 212,055. However, we also note that the city has 9638. So not a huge difference in size. But yeah, it is a discrepancy.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I just have a follow-up to that point, if that's okay? If you look on page, like as I pointed out on my brief, they didn't submit the rent roll, they submitted part of the IND 21, they submitted what they submitted, but it's more complete on page 45 of the agent's roll, where they submitted the rent roll from 2018, end of 2018. And if you look at the last page, it has uncommitted area, current leased area, and committed future areas. They have a buildable area of 77,377 square feet, and a BOMI certified area, which is most the leasable area should be looking at, it's 74,154 square feet. So we're at 71,077 square feet. So regardless of your 2,000 on one side or the other, I think we're close enough. So
Okay. Now, in terms of the shortfall, Mr. Navarro, you're on the restaurant, you're using $12.99, and the city is using $12. Is that why the $12.99?
It actually should be 12. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And those are my questions.
Thank you. Mr. Pike, did you have any questions?
No questions, thanks.
Thank you. I also had no questions. Do either of you wish a summation?
No.
On this property? No? All right. We're going to proceed to number 6, which is 276 Portage Avenue.
I will have some rebuttal on this, so
we'll do the rebuttal at the very end.
okay.
Thank you.
But they have it as well, right?
You will have it when you address it.
Okay, that's all check. All right, file number 2254. Roll number is 12093224-100. Address is 276 Portage Avenue. The 2023 assessment is for $5,983,000. We have a building that was built in 1910 and substantially renovated. It has an effective age of 1981. I didn't go through, given when it was done. The agent report covers a lot, so I'll leave a lot of it out. The agent go through it as well, but that's the rationale for the increase in effective age from 1910. Leasable area is 32,502 square feet. So if you look on the next page and you kind of get it from there, you can see that this was a restored building. They put a lot of work into it. I haven't been in this building, I've just seen file photos. It's quite a nice building. So if you look on page 3, second, we have please redact that out. There's a sale there that shouldn't be in there.
Your post reference.
Yeah,
Yes.
I apologize. That should not be there.
Thank you.
I missed that. I apologize. Again, we're doing market value, not contract. That so on page 4 and 5, that is the same Class C building comparables that we already spoke to today. So we did average at $15.08 a square foot for the building itself. The workshop on page 6, we have a 33,502 square foot building at an average rent of $16.05 a square foot, which produces a net operating, PGI of 537,707. So we do have an elevated above market rent, but it is on Portage. It is a renovated building. A $16 rent, I don't, it's not unachievable. It is an upfront rent, but it's reflective of the condition of the building that we have. So our same standard parameters apply to the PGI, at 12% for vacancy, expenses at 3%, non-recoverable expenses at 3%, and shortfall at $10, produces a net operating income of $482,785, capped at 7%, gives the $5,983,000. So look at page 10. The tenant. So it is 100% occupied. Following up. Sorry, I apologize for the small print, but it's the best I can get as we go along with it. On page 12 is the income statement. So as we can see, everything when you get down to line item 7899 would summate to the net operating income, and anything below that would be obviously your mortgage payments and things of that nature. You wouldn't be included in that, so you would be putting that back in. Well, the report is on the questionnaire. Report is on the equity page. Just bear with me here where I do one quick calculation here. So the reported net operating income that we have for the 1 year, if you just take out the mortgage payment, would be $332,160. This is going to be 3 years. So just bear with me here. Okay. All right. So, and that is over, or just under than what we have reported at 418,000. So it's roughly about an $86,000 differential between market and what the performance of the subject property is at. So with that, I am open to questions.
Thank you. Mr. Harrell.
I believe you said that you hadn't inspected this building, correct? Okay. And everything is model driven. You haven't adjusted that rent of $1605?
No, it's on the higher side, like I explained, because of the renovation work that occurred in the location that it is. So it's more competing with your Class B building than your C building. But it is a C, but another end C or a lower end middle range B, if you look at it that way. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Mr. Hardy.
No questions right now.
Thank you. Mr. Peich.
No questions right now, thanks.
And I have no questions at this time. Mr. Navarro, if you'd like to proceed.
Okay, we're looking at 276 Portage Avenue. I believe this was known as the Burks Building. And you can see some wonderful pictures on page 6 and 7. And also on page 8, just a brief description of the property. It is an older property, again, renovated in 2006. You can see its heritage status. This is under the municipal bylaw, not the federal one that we looked at previously. And there is some additional information there about historical buildings. So just to be clear about how heritage assets are funded, usually through some type of programming that the city of Winnipeg or the province of Manitoba funds. So there were 3 main funding mechanisms in place. You can see number 1, 2, and 3. So the only one that's still active is the Gale Carbon Hammerquest Fund at this point.
Now, the other ones can be refunded, but those have to be done through council. In terms of highest and best use, we believe it to be the current use. We haven't looked at the cost approach. We have looked at potential rents, and those are OFC rents. And we also looked at the actual rent in place, which we feel is the best indicator of market rent. So we've gone with the market rent 1472 or $493,149 rent. In terms of vacancy, there was no vacancy at that point, so we've just gone with the standard market vacancy, standard market shortfall, and we've gone with our non-recoverable expenses of 7%. In terms of capitalization rate, again, I've mentioned with these heritage buildings, we start at 8%, and we've put in at 8%. Now, we have a section here regarding deferred capital here in terms of the heritage building. We haven't actually adjusted that into the capitalization rate. We've taken that as a lump sum, and you will see that in the calculation as we go further. So there was an actual study regarding the deferred capital. So there are some issues that I will speak to later in the appendix. But on page 18, you can see our workup. Again, we have 1472 as our base rent and 493,149 as our market rent, 12% vacancy, 10% shortfall, 7% for other, and 8% capitalization rate give us a value of $4,542,389. We've made a further adjustment of that to $871,000. Bringing the indicated market value to $3,671,389. As we go on page 19, nothing to look at there. Further on, we have the income and expenses that were submitted, the COVID questionnaire, and then the marketing materials. So this property went for sale, started for sale on January 2021. I can guarantee that this is from January 2021. It's not, didn't come from afterwards. On page, I don't know if you can make out the pages after that. 25, 26, they may be hidden in that colored ink. 28, if you look at 28, again, this was marketed through Collier's multi-use building. There was a rent in place at the time with an option to renew for another 5 years. And in terms of the in-place NOI, they rated it at 387,003. The offering price at that time was $3,750,000. And they give an in-place capitalization rate of 8.1%. The next page over, let's start on page 30. That is the engineering report. And they outline on page 37 the detailed work that has to be conducted on the building and the timeframes. Page 38, you can see the engineer's stamp there. And further on to that, you can see some of the pictures of the work that has to be conducted. Again, I remind you that this is a heritage property. And beyond that, there, for example, on page 59, there is some there's a media article about the bay and the appraisal that was done on it. And also some additional information on heritage properties that we collected. I don't think there's any need to go over that information. So I'm open for questions.
Okay.
Quick question, so the province occupied, provincial government occupied? Sorry, provincial government occupied, obviously,
Was,
was current, when did it currently start? When was it negotiated?
the current lease was, negotiated in March of, March of 14.
March 14th, yeah, so I'm just going through, we have a $16.05, so basically $16 rate, and March of 14, we have a $14.72 rate negotiated at that point, right?
Right.
So we're off about fucking 30 cents. It's not unreasonable for the time right now. Okay. Getting to the engineering report from Crozier Kilgore. Highlighting on page 37. You have approximately $871,000 repairs and that need to be done. I'm not contesting the report. They're very reputable leading firm. Short-term items broken into things that need to be done now, medium, long-term things that could be done on an advertised kind of future base.
I'm not so sure about that. I had a talk with the property manager about that. A lot of the items have degraded a little bit faster than.
Yeah, so realistically, in the short term, immediate need, you're looking at about $300,000 of cost. And in the long term, you're looking at about another $500,000 to $600,000. Intermediate need should be done fairly soon.
Yes and no. I would say no. We were conservative on this. In our subsequent conversation with the property manager, what they detailed to us is that, first of all, this report was done in 2019. Since then, prices have skyrocketed for materials, for labor. So that is almost doubled by the time of the reference date.
Okay, so I'm not going to contest the cost of inflation. But as far as the repairs, these are more of a capital in nature, right? More of a major repair. These aren't small. These aren't replacing carpets. This isn't replacing sinks in a bathroom, or this is exterior.
No, I think somebody could go in there now and rent, like as is.
No, maybe the repairs that are here, as indicated,
Are cosmetic, and they are some structural.
yeah, they're capital. The exterior.
Exactly.
So they're capital.
They're not going to affect rent.
And that's what I'm getting at. It's not a tenant fit of repair item where you would do it in a day.
No.
Okay. That's right. That's all the questions I have. Thank you. Oh, sorry. One other thing. I think we glossed over this on page 28 of the Collier's report. They're listing for 3.75 million.
Mhm.
We have an in-place NOI of 387,000.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. And that's why I was asking, is it a provincial government tenant? Because they're listing it as a.
It was, when it was listed, it was provincial government.
So that.
Well, sorry, correction, Terranet.
Right, they are provincial government.
They went from provincial to private.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's a weird thing. I'm not sure if you know.
Because that would obviously influence if you have a long-term government tenancy versus a non-government tenancy. So.
Terranet essentially bought land titles from the province of Manitoba.
Okay, I didn't know. That's why I was asking to see the provincial government.
Yeah.
All the rest of it. So, okay. All right. That's all the questions I have. I'll leave us. Thank you.
Mr. Harden, questions?
Okay, on the deferred maintenance, and are these are exterior maintenance, but they don't affect the stability or the safety of the building at all? Is that correct?
No, they actually do affect the safety, actually, because if there is enough, as I understand, if there is enough cracking of some of these areas, they present some danger that some of this stuff may fall. So I would say that there is more short-term than is being listed there. So some of the items that are medium range and long range have kind of deteriorated more, and now they're more so in the short range, as well as the prices, the inflationary costs. Because of inflation, those costs have more than doubled now.
Okay, so this report was done in
2019.
2019, and no work has subsequently been done on it up to the reference date?
So I believe they may have started. However, that is again, that is just I believe. The building is now empty, so they are actually in the process of starting to shell some of the space. Floors 3 and 4 are not, they are complete. They have the existing office finish that was there, but the main floor and floor 2 are, they're in the process of, I guess, gutting those areas and starting to rebuild them. But that won't be for a while. I think the timeline they set is sometime in 2024. So.
Okay. All right. No further questions then.
Thank you. Mr. Peich?
No, my question was along the same lines as Mr. Harden, and that is, what are the criteria for something to be signed into short term versus medium term versus long term? And those short term, is that a safety concern, or is that the medium term is now the safety concern? Because you seem to imply there's some safety issues.
Yeah. And, I can't quote exactly, but I believe some of it has been done. So it may be the short term stuff. However, what this gets into is that those repairs, all of that had to have been contemplated into the sale price of the property. So that is why it's sold for less than what the city is estimating the value at. And it kind of speaks to the, and I don't have to speak about the sale itself because I can look directly at the sales facts on page 28. If we're speaking strictly about the sales facts on page 28, you can see the difference in value. And this also speaks to the issue of heritage buildings that we were talking about with 123 Main Street. So there's a clear example of what happens to the marketability and the pricing of a property that goes to market when it is a heritage property, because they come with a lot of skeletons in them. I'll leave it at that.
No, that's great. Thank you. No other questions.
Thank you. I just have one quick question. This building, it always had this terracotta exterior.
I believe the terracotta is original and had been, like, there's decorative on the side there. Yeah, I think it's been I believe they had people working on it originally in 2006 to clear it up, get it looking better. But I believe, yes, the design is original.
Okay, so, but I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you're saying though that since the sale, there has been no work done on the building?
Since the sale, well, so the sale occurred after the reference date.
Of course. Sorry, I thought that's what you had said, so that's why I'm just asking.
Yeah, so some of the capital stuff I believe has been done to address some of those short-term issues that were, I guess, a concern.
Okay, and you inspected the property?
I did. I was there last week.
Can you speak to the interior?
Well, first of all, for 2006, I thought that the third and fourth floor were kind of dated looking. That's just my opinion, but I mean, it looks somewhat like this without the good lighting coming from the outside. So not particularly modern looking. The main floor and the second floor, again, they were starting the process of gutting the spaces, so I can't really give you an idea because I mean they're just going to tear everything out. Yeah, so that's the current condition, physical condition of the property, and there's nobody in there.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Rebuttal?
Okay, I'll start with just a little synopsis of the report, just so everyone knows I'm a structural engineer and technologist. If I would be registered, it would be registered with the CPAM, Certified Engineer Technologist and Technician of Manitoba. I work in the assessment department, so I'm registered with the assessment officers in Manitoba. But having said that, when you go through the report from Croce Kilgore, they were a structural firm. The report does indicate design and construction issues for the envelope. There is no safety concern as far as a structural standpoint. When I looked at, these are merely if the building components such as pilaster, cladding comes off and hits someone, that is a safety concern clearly. As you can see from the pictures, when you go through it, that's exactly what you see. Those aren't structural elements, but those are exterior cladding, those are exterior. As you go through it, those are definitely issues if you know, if you look at page 43, one of those pieces of come off and hit someone, that's definitely an issue. So for a safety concern, as far as people walking on the street and a pedestrian aspect, it is definitely a safety concern. But there was no reference to any structural issue in the building itself, and I wouldn't expect there to be. Otherwise, it would have been a much more glaring report as far as what needs to be done and back to date kind of thing. So getting through how we should value this, how we should put account from this point. It sounds like there may have been some stuff already done, so I'm a little bit at the reference date as far, or not the reference date, but the physical year of 2023, January 1st, what was physically done, was it improved? I'll leave it up to the agent's owner to comment on that. But as far as how we address this is something that is already highlighted on the board order for 299 4th Street. This is an order for Civic Parkade, or once was a Civic Parkade, it's now in Boardroom Street. And it was a very similar issue as far as deferred maintenance, capital costs, how it should be treated, and it's highlighted for your reference. As we go along, one of the issues was on page 3 of that, the method used to account for the deferred maintenance costs identified in two conditional valuation supports for the city's Winnipeg Parkade services 2005 and for the Crown Management in 2010. And just so we go through this, I had this property under appeal after this. This was done by Michael Cortavent at that point. He was an assessor assigned this. I had this assigned in 2014 and 16 where I read the reports and went through this order to determine how we should handle this. So on page 4 indicates deferred maintenance. Both parties agreed that the physical condition of the subject property. There was 2 reports. Essentially, one report was worse and the other one wasn't so bad. And they actually got the renovation of the property, which happened, or restoration of the parking, which happened later. It was kind of middle of the road in most areas. But having said that, there was some work that needed to be done that was capital in nature, major expense repair in nature, not reflected of the operating income and operating expenses. When it's capital nature, how do you address for deferred maintenance or major repairs or of a capital nature? So when you go through this, essentially the agent argued for a couple different positions. He wanted to take the value of what needed to be done and take it back to the sale price, what the hypothetical sale price, and reduce it from that. The board essentially said no. They did say no. So after everything was done, highlighted on page 6, analysis and conclusion of the board, the question of deferred maintenance costs and how they to be treated with assessment represents most of the 2 difference in the assessed values presented to the board. Both parties presented described evidence of the complete report commissioned by the owners describing the repair and maintenance of the building on date. The agent, last paragraph on page 6, the agent suggests 3 methods to deal with the deferred maintenance costs. A board could purchase cost to cure and advertise the debt, which what you see usually.
or a purchaser might be able to negotiate a higher capitalization rate to reflect heightened risk to the, as the assessor prefers, has done, or a purchaser could deduct the cost to cure from the purchase price, which is what was being done here today. And highlighted in red, the employing the cost to cure is the option that the agent presented to the board. Page 7. The agent then needs a lump sum calculated by the report. Is recommended to take off the sale price. And it's effectively what you see here today. The 871,000 is what this report indicates. And of course, this is on a smaller scale, but equitability, we treat it the same way. Indicates that that's what was the preferred method of the agent. Whereas that's not what this assessor was wanted to do. So essentially what the board did was not do that. They indicate the rationale. And when you look at it, highlighted in red again on the last second last paragraph, because the agent does so because the assessment department parameter, meaning the capitalization rate was used, and that he has deducted the lump sum from the net operating the cost to cure the maintenance issue, the deferred maintenance capital costs that are in nature. The board didn't do that. The board opted to use, in the last paragraph, the board opted to use capitalization rate adjustment as method to address the issue of the sinking on the third level. Just so we're clear, that one of the levels was sort of sinking and creating less headspace or vertical space where some of the parking stalls were, there's a bit of a risk there. What was done after we went through the property, essentially, they put up small car only signs, which is not untypical, which is not that unheard of when you go through parkade. Some areas do have ventilation, which limits the where you can park. You can't get a full size vehicle. They may have a small car only kind of thing. And that's pretty much the only thing that was done to address this space here. But what they did for this here is to address that issue by increasing the capitalization rate from a lower point, 8.5 to 8.75. They did not deduct any capitalization or capital costs, any deferred maintenance, anything that the report said as a lump sum to cure that. They didn't do it. So essentially, it's the exact same thing that we're dealing with here today, just on a smaller scale, but for equitability, it's the same. Whereas we have here, we have the $871,000, which is being reduced from the capitalized value. So it's essentially the exact same thing, although one is a building, one's a parkade. For capital cost, major expense repairs, effectively, we should be using this as a guide. So in my position, we should be taking $871,000 off. It's capital cost in nature, major expense repairs. And from what it sounds like, there may have been somewhat already completed at January 1st, 2023, which is already money spent on water and the bridge kind of thing. You would be taking that off anyways moving forward. So with that, open questions on any of the rebuttal if necessary.
Mr. Navarro.
Yes, at the time, was that part paid for sale?
No, it was already purchased.
Okay, so would you not think that in this case that a prudent purchaser would have to look at that amount?
Well, as far as outside of the assessment scope, yeah, but inside the assessment scope, we have assessment case law which governs that. So
you mentioned yourself that there are several ways of doing this, and the board elected to use a capitalization rate, correct?
The board elected to use an
adjustment on the capitalization.
and that's why I made it clear. They adjusted it a quarter point based on the.
But you're not
No,
suggesting that in every situation where capital costs or anything like that are involved, that the board should only consider 25 points?
No, they increased it, the risk to the slab on grade, which was fluctuating because that could not be cured. Meaning they can't cure fluctuating groundwater level and the natural tendency of the slab on grade. In some areas where we went through the parkade, it was noticeable, but they addressed it with a small car only sign, so you could park there. It's just
And that order specifically speaks about a parkade, correct?
it speaks about a parkade, but in nature of how to treat capital costs and nature repairs and deferred
And
maintenance.
that is the only order you have regarding that.
I could have brought in more. This was the one that highlights an engineering report and how to handle the cases of this nature. So in this case here, the subject property
870,000 is a much smaller issue. Than the larger park in the city, obviously. But as a, how you treat capital repairs and major expense repairs, deferred maintenance, it's the exact same format that should be used.
Okay, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Harden.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Peich.
No questions.
And I have no questions in regards to this. Thank you. Did you,
Summarize
or,
quick.
all right,
Okay, you can go first.
I'm good. I just generally we don't take capital costs off. We have a how to as far as how to do it. I'm not saying that those aren't needing to be addressed, and they should. And I'm not sure if they were addressed at January 1st, 2023, which would mean it would be something you'd be even looking at this point. So with that, I think the rents that were in place from 2006 or 14, I can't remember now, were only about $1.30 off of what was there. So really market's really reflective, just a point in time, right?
So again, we're documenting the issues of heritage properties and skeletons that come with them. And I think this is a perfect example of what can happen to the market value of the property when you have a heritage property. Now, I don't think there's any way of getting around the fact that the property was marketed for roughly $3.7 million, which is almost $2 million lower than the assessment. But what this comes down to is what somebody was willing to pay on the open market for this property, and 3.7 million, as according to the page 28, is about the upper limit for this property. I'll leave it at that.
Sorry, I have just one follow-up question.
yes.
Part of it was piecing it all together. When it was listed for sale, was it known that the province or the tenant was leaving, meaning that were they essentially buying an empty building and any purchaser would know that?
No.
Okay, so when did that change the tendency to go to no tenancy? Because
I believe it happened sometime after the sale, that they.
or was there a way to get out of the lease that was in place, or was it at least ending?
No, the lease was ending, and then they had an option to extend the lease, but they had, from our conversations, there was no mention of them getting advance notice on that.
So any purchaser of the property would know that there was an option for the tenant to leave and could leave. And given that they're moving some of you said they were taking it back to base, is there any tenants that are moving in at this point?
Are there tenants moving
I mean,
in?
if they're doing tenant fit up work, meaning scraping away what's there and redeveloping it, do they have a prospective tenant already?
Yeah.
Okay, so at this point, they already had a future forecast of what they thought, so there really was no vacancy. It was just a matter of moving one tenant out and applying for another one to come in. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Harden, did you have any questions?
No.
And Mr. Peich?
Don't.
Thank you. We'll move on to property number 7, 333 Portage.
File number 22-2087. Roll number is 13-05-23-51-000-333 Portage. 2023 self-use for $2,034,000. It's owner occupied. It's the Aboriginal People's Television Network Incorporated. Before we get going, they run this alongside with 339 Portage, which is a Class C building. There is walkway in between the two. This is a former bank space. There was some renovation done to both buildings that allow for the business to basically operate out of the 339 Portage, and this section of the building, which is an old bank space, was converted to a media studio. So this is where they do their that aspect of it. So Mr. Froelich went through this property. or went through, and would have went through this property too for 339, Portage was under appeal, and I helped a little bit in that, but essentially this is a converted bank space to this section of this whole number is a converted bank space to where I guess your lights, camera, and action would go along with it. Your media news, media element of the buildings or of the business of that version of people's television network. So, with that said, the year built was 1957. We have an effective year of 1986, which is why there was a renovation done to accommodate the new use of the property. We have a leasable area of 18,814 square feet. Pictures are as I was describing on page 2, and as you can see, it's run in sister with 339 Portage, and we're dealing with this aspect of it, the OFS aspect of we would call it an OFS. So, on page 3 of the permit work that was done associated with it, it's not that much given the aspect of it. This is for this particular address. The other one has different 339 Portage has different permits, but this permit for this subject property, you're looking at $750,000. You know, several years from now, but back then it was still not all that much of a conversion. So, from that point in time, we have a sale in 2010, and again, our original People's Television Network, I believe, I know was the tenant of, but they bought the properties that they occupy now. So, the sale for $1,050,000, I wouldn't in any way to it's too far from the property. So, from the reference page, I should say for the property sale. So, on page 7 is the Class C comparables. You could look at this as a OFS. It is less than 3 stories, or 3 stories or less, I should say. But realistically, the way that it was converted and how it's being run with the other property, you should be looking at a Class C or a Class C income stream or renting tenancy, if you want to see it like that, with the income stream associated with it. So from that point, it's the same rents and comparables that we've already used. Again, weighted average is about $13. On the next page, on page 8, we have for 10,300, 10,037 square feet, $15.19, and for the basement area, we have $3.83 as a substandard finished maintenance business that typically was. We don't have any. I don't believe they did any renovation work, as it was indicated to the $750,000. It's not that much given the subject property. So I would assume the basement is exactly as such substandard. But I do expect that the actual media studio that's in there would rent for a little bit more than what the average C building would, given the nature and use of the property. So $15.19 is pretty reasonable. And we've assessed it as such. So, so that is a bit of above market rent, and obviously being reflected, like I said, the use of it. So with our standard parameters associated with the PGI, which that produces, which is $186,078, 12% for vacancy, non-recoverable expenses of 3%, and shortfall at $10, produces a net operating income of $136,260, capped at 6.7%, gives the $2,034,000. And from that point, if you go to page 12 and on, is just the COVID report. It indicated that it was a significant impact. We get some that has minor impacts, but most of them are minor. Some of them owners check off as significant. Obviously, they're a media studio. They're programming through this. If most of the employees couldn't be here, it would affect the business aspect of it significantly. From that perspective, maybe that's why they check that off. But from an income perspective, is what we're looking at. They're not affected. You know, I'm sure there's a little bit more cost involved, and at the same time, if you're going into the building, you're turning it down, you're recovering some costs in that aspect. I'm not sure. I'll leave it at that for as far as how significant the COVID impact is there. If you look at it, like I said, from the day-to-day operations of the business, I'm sure significant would be more in line.
page 14 is the reported income and expense questionnaire. It's all there. It's reported online as the format that you see. And again, if you don't check off this, they do check off as fully owner occupied. It doesn't come through quite as well on a scale. So from that point, we know there's no income being generated and the costs associated with the property are as such. So with that, I'm open to questions.
Thank you.
Mr. Cole, you've been in this building?
No. I have many pictures of it. I sat through all the 339.
Okay. So are you aware that when you walk in, you're basically looking at a large lobby space?
Yeah, okay. It's like I said, when they renovated it from the back to this, it wasn't much put into it. That's what it's highlighted. It's only $750,000 put into a property of this size. That's not that much to convert it over.
And so your rents that are OFC rents are reflecting actual office space, OFC space. This is not your typical OFC, correct?
No, and it wouldn't be as the use of the property,
Right.
Is
And so your average CRU size of 5987, that's on page 7. Your average is 1262, your weighted average 1308, and your median is 12. But yet the model has predicted 1519 for this space. Not a little high?
based on the use of the multimedia studio, I would say it's on the conservative end. If you look at what CTV was, obviously a much better building. You see the rents that are in place there. The only other ones that you could really look at would be 2 Portage. Again, way different.
Okay, but we
Brought in. So
did just say that this is pretty much just an open lobby down. How much there?
as I
If you
indicated,
walk into the next building, there you do see the studios.
yeah. And that's what I'm indicating, like,
So it's like the front porch of a house. Is it really that,
if you're asking me their day-to-day use and how they choose to use their building,
okay,
that's part of their business formats.
that's good enough. The rest, I mean, it's all model driven, correct? You haven't changed this?
No.
Okay, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Harden?
Question on the cap rate. For most of the OFCs we've done today, the cap rate has been 7% for argument's sake. Why is this one lower than 7%?
Well, 6.7 isn't so far off of that. The only thing I don't do the model cap rates, but I mean, you're looking at the location. It's more of a driving impact as far as close proximity downtown. You're obviously across from True North there. Canada, can't speak to Canada Life Center. You're also looking at the size of the square foot of the building, which would be smaller. So there would be more of a potential purchase competition for it. So you drive a little bit higher, demand for it. And then just the use of the building. The building was a former bank space. If this was to be left as a bank and a vacant bank, we'd be talking a much higher rate than a $50 rate. But bank spaces usually don't stay vacant for very long. They're either occupied as a swap or as something else. So reflective of the income that would be brought on it, I don't think it's 6.7. It's out of line with the located property use.
Okay, but
If it was simply an OFS on its own, then yeah, around the 7%, just, but what it is now, I think 6.7 is
okay, but in terms of size, you've said that it's one economic unit with a building next door.
we have separate roll numbers. So in theory, I guess we could make one roll number out of it. I mean, realistically, I don't think the owner's going anywhere anytime soon. But if they were to request it, I don't see why we wouldn't do it. Maybe it might make it easier. But the way that this was purchased and the way that their titles are for these, we still have 2 separate roll numbers. So I have to assess the roll number that's under field today. So I did speak to the 339 now, obviously, because you have to when that's property they're effectively one economic unit.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Peich, any questions?
What proportion of the 10,000, approximately 10,000 square feet leasable area is studio versus some other common space?
I couldn't tell you that. I haven't inspected the property. All that I have to go from is the inspector that went through, which was Assessor Mr. Furley, who went through it. And given use to the property. I couldn't comment anymore on that, so I'll let the
Okay.
agent.
Okay, thank you. No other questions.
Thank you, and I have no questions. Mr. Navarro, would you like to proceed with your?
Sure. This is 333 Portage Avenue, and you can see the pictures there on page 6 and 7. This used to be a CIBC. It is now part of APTN. And as Mr. Cole indicated, it is essentially one economic unit with 339 Portage. So I use the analogy of a front porch, and that's how I look at this building, is that it is the entryway into the actual proper office building that houses APTN, where the bulk of the studios are. I would say that entering this building, what you see is a large front lobby area. You could call it wasted space. And I don't know how much actual programming is occurring there, but I would say that probably not more than 50% of it is probably dedicated towards actual television use. The other is what I deem to be wasted space. So it's not your atypical office building in that sense, and that's kind of why I had that line of questioning regarding the rents. Now, the rent that I have in place is $12. This is again based on market comparables. It has a blended rent of $9.20 because we don't put much value on the basement area. In terms of vacancy, we are just going with standard vacancy, shortfall, and non-recoverables again. So capitalization rate of 7.75. We have an income value of $1,615,307. And that is what we're asking for as a reduction. Now, 7.75% is the typical capitalization rate that we use for Class C buildings. I'm not going to move away from that. The only issue is obviously the non-recoverable should be calculated slightly different. That's about it.
May I make a suggestion? Take a 5-minute break after this appeal, and you can come back with a corrected number that you were looking for.
Yeah.
Because I know I highlighted it too. It should have been 5 and 7.
Yeah.
So
That's fine, we'll do that.
So I'm open for questions now.
just a quick question. Like, I mean, obviously this is a change of use property and it was bought by the APCN. When you're looking at this type of property, it's a former bank, it's converted. Basically, it's a very well-built building. Banks typically are overbuilt.
But the vaults are still there.
So it was converted from a bank. How much of the bank space was removed? Was the vault removed? Was the?
No, I believe the vaults are still
The
there.
vaults are still there, so okay. As far as the media studio, I don't see any pictures in the brief.
No, yes.
Would you?
I've been through this building more than once.
And what I'm saying is for a C class building, if it was just typical C office place, we're at $13 or so. If you're a multimedia building, you're significantly greater than $15 or significantly greater than $13. You look at our house building or just CTV or CK Global, which is a 2-1 Portage, you're getting significantly different buildings greater than. We didn't put that in anywhere near there. All we did was put it a little bit above the higher range of the C. So you feel that an increase from what an office building would be at about $13 to around 15. I mean, Well, okay, the running one numbers, $15.19, which is basically a $2.50 increase is not appropriate or.
Well, I mean, I would ask where CTV and what's it called? It's not called CTV. Global.
I know, I almost said it too.
What, I'm not sure where global rents at, is it 201? So again, I think there's a slight difference in location.
And that's my point. My point is a multimedia studio typically gets a greater rent and it's in a better building. In this case here, the subject property.
Better building than this.
Is in a C and a fuller bank, because there's essentially when you put on even. So when we're only increasing it around a little over $2, we reflect about the condition of that and saying that what it's being used for, that's not out of line. Like I see it being, being quite favorable. Like,
It makes the assumption that the rent was correct to begin with, and you know, again, the reason we appeal these rents is because we think the model is wrong. However, going back to the commentary about this space, this is not an atypical space. So to say that it is comparable to the studio areas that are rented by Global Media and CTV is slightly different. I'll agree with 339. That's a completely different space. And by the way, that is where the pictures are on 339, unfortunately.
Yeah.
This space is a lot of dead space. So what kind of value do you put on it? I'm not sure. I wouldn't put as high a value on it as I would for those other locations. 201 Portage, even 260 Hargrave. This is a different space, and you know, when we look at 339, we can argue about that, but yes, 339 is a different space. It's a studio. You can see the studios all the way from the main floor up.
All right, I'll leave it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Harding, did you have any questions?
Okay, just an observation again with the 7% expenses. The expenses are non-recoverables are 10,663. The NOI becomes 119,093. And that capped at 7 3/4 gives a value of 1,537,000.
We'll trust the engineer.
Yeah, just love spreadsheets. Okay.
Up to you, it's your file.
Yeah, I'm good. I believe.
I still.
Yeah.
Oh, all right.
Okay, so
Okay.
I have no questions otherwise.
Thank you, Mr. Hardin. Any questions, Mr. Page?
Questions?
Thank you. Just really briefly, because I'm not understanding what is in this space. So you walk
It
in,
would be like a large open area like this.
but there is no office, there is nobody in
No,
there?
There's
No
studio
reception.
space. So there's a desk there for, I guess, them to do some broadcasts.
Okay,
But no, there's no real office area in there.
okay, so I'm assuming then that's where they do the news.
And they have other studios in 339.
Right,
Yeah.
right. All right,
That's essentially what Mr. Furley was indicating, so we're on par.
thank you.
Yeah.
That's all my questions. Do either of you have a wish for summation on this property? No. All right. Then we're just going to take a very quick 2-minute break. And I would like to call this hearing back to order. And we are going to hear the last property at our docket, which is 320A Donald Street. And whenever you are ready.
File number 223230. Roll number is 13052304,000. Civic address is 320 Donald. It's sometimes referred to as 320A Donald Street. 2023 assessment is for $3,297,000. Built in 1975. We have a leasable area of 30,453 square feet. If you look at the next page over. So, downtown office building, Class C office building.
As we go through it, it's the same comparables that are on page 4 and 5 that we've already spoke to, the weighted average of $13.08. On the next 4 page is the workup for the property. Essentially, we have a $14 average for the property, which for the 30,453 square feet produces a PGI of $426,401. We do have a maximum chronic 25% vacancy. I'll get to this in a little bit. This is what would on the roll. This is what would put on it. It's been vacant for a little bit. I was looking at to see if it was still warranted and should be put at 25%. I'm making no change. I'm saying it should be left for this hearing. We're moving forward. I may, given discovery and whatnot, I may change that moving forward if this does go to the support. So I'm just putting that in record now. So with the 25% chronic vacancy or maximum vacancy we give, we have an effective gross income of $319,800. Our expenses at 3% non-recoverable. And shortfall at $10 produces a net operating income of $234,074. Capped at 7.1% gives us a $3,297,000. So moving on from that point, with the 25% vacancy in mind, usually when I'm applying a chronic vacancy to a property, it's first thing that comes up: what's functionally obsolescent about it? What is a barrier to marketplace? Chronic vacancy for me in this report is what I'm looking at. It starts at about 20%, meaning you're expecting permanent vacancy, or 25% at full vacancy into the future for a significant amount of time. There's barriers to market, there's problems, there needs to be something to be redeveloped to cure that, or what have you, or sometimes properties simply can't generate the income to justify fixing any functional obsolescence. So at that point, there is an economic barrier to it to prevent it to change that. So and that's kind of where I was reviewing it moving forward. So on page 10 starts the IE that I looked at. So for 2020, that year, they were 100% vacant. And then as I go through, I look back at the other IEs that were in place to see and try and gauge what, and there's the COVID reported as well, the significant impact, and then on the right and inability to lease the property, which I'm not sure maybe in relationship to how they're looking at it. If it was already vacant, it's already vacant, right? So, but moving on from that, I looked at what the vacancies were in the past and see what kind of rents the building was current in and what the tendencies were prior, to determine why it's been given, why there's 25% vacancy in place. So as we can see, if we go back to 2015, it was at 8.25% vacant. So right away, you look at the tendencies involved, there were public works, so the federal governments, and then Novacon. So right away, those are, in order to get a federal tenancy, you have to have a good building. It can't be a marginal building or full building. Like, they have requirements for these to be a tenant for a federal building, or for federal tenancy to building. So in 2015, obviously they left. Their lease expired in 16, and then Novacon also expired in 16 as well. So from that point in time, it's been vacant. And you see the rents that were in place, their gross rents. Then you look at the next pages on 17, they were 100% occupied with no vacant spaces in 13. So from around 16 onwards, they have no tenancies within the building up to the reference date. But it is a significant period of time, and there should be an allowance for vacancy. I'm just not quite sure it should be at the 20% or greater. But for this appeal, I'll leave it as such. And I'll address any issues with the questions. For that, I'm open to questions.
Thank you, Mr. Farrell.
Have you inspected this building?
Not this one, just the file folders that we have and the information that was produced.
And so you know that this building has been marketed, correct? Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hart, any questions?
No questions.
Mr. Peich?
Any questions?
We also have no questions at this time. Mr. Navarro, if you'd like to proceed.
Yes. So you can see the pictures on page 6 and 7. I am just gonna stick, go to page 17. That is where we have a workup. And we've applied a $12 market rent to it, 25% vacancy, non-recoverables of 10. Our standard 7% non-recoverables, 8% capitalization rate. We have a value of $2,328,923. Obviously, the difference is a slight difference on rent, the non-recoverables, and a slight difference on capitalization rate. I believe the assessor is at 7.1. 7.1. It's not slight, actually. It's almost 90 points. It is 90 points. So I've included some of the same information that Mr. Pohl has. I've included the most recent I&E marketing materials on page 27. And some of Mr. Pohl's OFC rents. So I don't think that there's been any lack of trying to rent this building out. I don't know the reasons really why it hasn't. But it continues to have this vacancy issue. So I'm open for questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Not doubting there's vacancy, not doubting there's active marketing, I can see it. If we look at your page, starting at 27, this is Davis and Young, they're well known. They're advertising at $23 gross, which would work out to be roughly $13 roughly. So we're right in line, 14 better than average what we have here. But when we look through the building, the location, it's in the, I mean, it's not quite in the shed, it's the opposite border of the shed, but it's right backing on to 311 Portage, which has a great restaurant, Class A building. If you look at the spaces that are there, bit dated, but still pretty nice. There has been no tendencies or no bites, no anything. That's why I'm like looking for the functional obsolescence would keep market from coming in at least one tenant, and I don't see it at all. In fact,
Well,
I see it. I see an older building. I mean, a little bit dated space with a federal tenancy. So it is a good.
I mean,
building.
it's what we ask ourselves, or we ask the same question is why. And that's why we made the adjustment on the capitalization rate, to be honest. It's at some point the carrying cost of this becomes an issue.
See, like when I'm looking at this, if the rent's fine, for I'd be putting without, you know.
I would actually lower the rent if you're really gonna.
Well, I'm saying for
Yeah.
what was on the record, I know it's saying change it from 25%, but I'd be looking at roughly 18%. That's where it comes into my mind's eye. And then maybe, but I'm looking for something that keeps market from here, and there isn't, and you're in a good location. And you're asking rent is $13, so we work it all, you're right, everything's in line, and yet for 8 years, there's nobody, or 7 years. So it kind of, you're the agent, so I'm gonna ask it through you to the owner, like, what's going on?
I wish I knew. I wish I knew.
Well, like your pictures are showing, it's good space, you can see it's good space.
It's, I mean, they're marketing it. It's, who knows why it's not empty. It could be the configuration inside. It was essentially one large tenant for the most part. There was a smaller tenant in there at some point, but I mean, that is just speculation at this point. I don't know.
Yeah, and that's kind of the pause I have on it, so I'm looking at a building that looks very marketable. And right in line, and the location, I mean.
Yeah. And then, you know, again, these, sometimes when you get large single tenant vacating, these are the issues sometimes that pop up is what do you do with that space? Do you reconfigure it?
to try and entice multiple tenants to come in. I don't know. I really don't know what's happened with this building.
Like this could be a 3 CRE building, correct?
Yeah,
So
effectively.
you don't even need to resell to one tenant. Like, I mean, I just don't see why it's sat so long vacant other than. And you are effectively marketing it from what I can tell. So I mean, and you're right in line, like they're doing their job exactly how I would be doing it and yet nothing. So.
Any further questions?
So I'll leave it at that. This last one.
Mr. Harden, any questions?
Nope.
Mr. Feitch?
No questions, thanks.
Thank you. Just
All
one
right.
quick question. Did you inspect this?
I did speak with the property managers, but you know, the questions were obviously very marketing this thing. Yeah.
So they're not asking outrageous rent?
No, they're right.
Okay,
So I pointed out, $23 gross rent works out roughly back in like $13, raise right at market, and it's better than average with dating, because I mean, it's still. What it is.
we have heard all the items on the docket today, and this hearing is adjourned. And I thank you, Mr. Navarro and Mr. Foley, for your time, and panel members. And our administrative secretary.